City of London. Welcome to this DK Eyewitness Travel Guide walk. For more information on the areas covered in this walk, check your guide between pages 146 and 163. These days, it's home to London's financial quarter, but the Square Mile began life as the ancient Roman settlement of Londinium, set hard against the north bank of the Thames. This walk will uncover several traces of that 2,000-year-old heritage, as well as plenty of stories from medieval times, when London was a walled city, and men of wealth and power organised themselves into trade guilds and banking houses, laying the foundations for what is now the second wealthiest business district in the world. Arrive at Tower Bridge for your starting point, which is sensational. A viewpoint right beside the Thames, which takes in both a 900-year-old Norman fortress, the Tower of London, and the city's lofty new landmark, the Shard. As the walk unfolds, you'll visit the capital's oldest surviving church and its spectacular cathedral, as well as some modern-day buildings, including the Lloyd's of London building and the Gherkin. The walk begins on Tower Wharf, on the northern bank of the river, beneath the arches of that great architectural icon, Tower Bridge. Tower Bridge. When Tower Bridge opened in 1894, the critics didn't like Horace Jones's flamboyant Gothic design. They called it tawdry, pretentious, and absurd. Today, it's one of London's most iconic structures, and the only bridge in the city that opens to permit water traffic. Its drawbridge-style bascules are still raised about 1,000 times a year to allow ships to pass, and the schedule is posted on the Tower Bridge website, if you'd like to see them in action. The bridge's high catwalks were originally designed for pedestrians, but unsurprisingly perhaps, nobody wanted to climb the 300 stairs to use them. Today you can take a tour, riding a lift 138 feet up onto the twin gantries for views along the river. The walkways are now lined with displays featuring trivia about the bridge, including the story of Albert Gunter, the flying bus driver who found himself vaulting through the air in 1952 when the bascules opened while his number 78 bus was still crossing. After the bus jumped the bridge, some passengers were injured, including 11-year-old Peter Dunn of Bermondsey, who fractured his collarbone. But what a story to tell! The exhibition continues in the Victorian engine rooms on the southern bank of the river, which show off the shiny steam turbines that powered the bascules until 1976, when electricity took over from the original hydraulic lifting gear. To find out more about how the bridge works, take a look at page 157 of your guidebook. The best view of the bridge is from the riverside back by the Tower of London, where you can also admire two of the capital's more recent architectural wonders. Directly across the water on the south bank looms Norman Foster's City Hall building, opened in 2002 as home to the Mayor and the London Assembly. To the right, meanwhile, you can see the Shard, London's tallest building. 1,000 feet of shimmering glass, it was the work of architect Renzo Piano and opened in 2012. Its 95 stories feature the highest observation gallery in the UK, including toilet cubicles with glass exterior walls, so that you can sit down and take in the view. Now turn to face the Tower of London. The Tower of London. It's easy to see why the tower is such a huge visitor draw. It looks like a castle from a children's pop-up book set right in the middle of modern London. It was built on the orders of William the Conqueror after the Norman conquest in 1066 to keep a wary eye on the city. And it's since served as a palace and a prison, a menagerie and a mint. For centuries it was the final lodging place for those accused of treason, many of whom were tortured here before getting the axe on nearby Tower Hill, which you'll be visiting shortly. At the heart of the fortress is the White Tower. Finished in 1078, it stands 90 feet tall and is the oldest complete building in London. These days it houses Henry VIII's armour, the executioner's chopping block, and a room of interactive weaponry, crossbows, jousting lances, and more. Walk west along the riverside to find Traitor's Gate, part of a medieval palace commissioned by King Henry III in 1220. In Tudor times, doomed prisoners, including Queen Anne Boleyn and Sir Thomas More, were conveyed into the tower here, direct from the river by barge. Behind Traitor's Gate stands the Wakefield Tower, home to the torture chamber with its rack for stretching, manacles for dangling, and a device called the Scavenger's Daughter for squeezing people to a pulp. And beside that stands the Bloody Tower, infamous for the unsolved disappearance of 12-year-old King Edward V and his 9-year-old brother Richard in 1483. Their uncle is the prime suspect in their murder. He went on to become King Richard III. Keep going along the riverside to reach the Bywood Tower, the modern-day visitor entrance to the fortress, but once home to the Royal Menagerie, where successive kings kept exotic animals from across the globe. Many of the species had not been seen in England before, and they included King George III's grizzly bear, which was named Martin, King James I's elephant, which was partial to red wine, and King Henry III's polar bear, which liked to fish for salmon in the Thames. A visit to the tower deserves at least half a day, so check out more information and illustrations on page 158 to 159 of your guide. You'll get to patrol the ramparts, fire a virtual crossbow, and examine Tower Green, where aristocratic prisoners were executed in private, away from the ghoulish crowds on Tower Hill. Among them were two of Henry VIII's wives, Catherine Howard and Anne Boleyn, though Anne expected to be granted a last-minute pardon, so no coffin was prepared. Instead, the Queen had to be buried in an arrow box. Venture inside, and you'll also get to ride a conveyor belt past the crown jewels, which include the royal sceptre with its 530-carat diamond, the second largest in the world. The jewels have been housed in the tower since the 17th century and have only once been stolen, in 1671, when an Irish adventurer named Colonel Blood tried to stuff them down his breeches. That raid was foiled, but King Charles II was so impressed with Blood's audacity that he granted him lands worth £500 a year. A highlight is taking a guided tour led by one of the tower's yeoman warders, more commonly known as beefeaters. Moira Cameron, their first ever female recruit, joined in 2007. One beefeater is tasked with looking after the resident ravens that have stalked the Tower of London since at least the time of Charles II. Legend holds that should the ravens ever leave the tower, the monarchy will crumble. So their wings are clipped, making them the only prisoners here today. You should consider returning one evening to see the tower locked up for the night at the atmospheric Ceremony of the Keys, which has happened here for 700 years. It starts at 9:30 p.m. precisely. Latecomers will not be admitted, and it ends with the playing of a bugle at 10 p.m. from the battlements. Attendance is free, but you'll need to apply in advance for a ticket. More information is available on page 58 of your guidebook. Reaching the end of the tower ramparts, turn right and pass through tall iron gates towards the ticket office buildings. To your right, you can look across the Tower Moat, which in 2014 was filled with a sea of 888,000 ceramic poppies by the artists Paul Cummins and Tom Piper as a memorial to the British lives lost in the First World War. As you climb the tower forecourt, turn left between the ticket booths and past the Tower Vaults Arcade, heading for the green pinnacle of All Hallows by the Tower. That's your next stop on this walk, and you'll find the entrance to the church on your right. All Hallows by the Tower. All Hallows is London's oldest surviving church, and it's packed with intriguing history, from the battles of Queen Boudica to beheaded bodies and the glowing embers of the Great Fire of London. Begin your visit down the steps to the crypt at the entrance by the Saxon Arch, where a pristine chunk of 2nd century Roman pavement was uncovered in 1926, along with a layer of ash that dates from the Celtic queen Boudicca's revolt against the invading Romans in the year AD 60. Boudicca's 100,000 warriors defeated the Roman forces, burning their 20-year-old settlement of Londinium to the ground. You'll find an intricate model of Roman London down here, and scraps of salvaged pottery from imperial days. Next, fast forward to Saxon times. Head back up the same stairs and look for the archway that survives from the original 7th century church, which was revealed suddenly when a German bomb hit the building during World War II. During the 16th century, meanwhile, All Hallows took in the headless corpses from Henry VIII's chopping block on nearby Tower Hill, whose site we'll visit next on this walk. In 1666, when all around was burning, All Hallows survived the Great Fire of London, thanks to the quick thinking of Admiral William Penn, the father of William Penn, founder of the province of Pennsylvania. The admiral blew up nearby buildings to create a firebreak. Meanwhile, Penn's next-door neighbour, Samuel Pepys, climbed the church steeple to watch the blaze, having first buried his precious Parmesan cheese in his garden for safety. Exit the church on the opposite side from where you entered to emerge on busy Bywood Street. Head to the right and cross at the traffic lights to enter Trinity Square Gardens. Trinity Square Gardens. The moving marble memorial that dominates this spot is dedicated to the seamen of the Merchant Navy and Fishing Fleet who lost their lives in the 2 World Wars. The First World War memorial, a stately vaulted corridor, was designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens, and it lists 12,000 victims. Just beyond, another 24,000 sailors are remembered in a sunken garden commemorating the Second World War. Immediately ahead of you as you enter the gardens, set into the paving tiles, is the original site of the Tower Hill scaffold, where enormous crowds once gathered to watch public executions, with jugglers and acrobats as a warm-up act. Plaques list the names of the noblemen and clerics who were decapitated here, many on the orders of King Henry VIII. They include Henry's chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, executed here in 1540 for his role in organising the king's ill-fated marriage to Anne of Cleves. Also Bishop John Fisher, beheaded in 1535 for refusing to accept Henry as supreme head of his new Church of England. Beheading was considered quicker and more honourable than hanging, and so was reserved for the nobility. Bishop Fisher's body was treated particularly harshly, being stripped and left on the scaffold until evening. His head was then stuck on a pole on London Bridge alongside other alleged traitors, but its lifelike appearance drew so much attention that it was soon thrown in the Thames, to be replaced by that of Sir Thomas More, King Henry's Chancellor, who was himself executed on Tower Hill a fortnight later. The last man to face the axe here was Lord Lovat in 1747, as punishment for his part in the Jacobite rebellion. Leave the gardens via the exit to the left of the execution spot, and turn right, then swiftly left into Muscovy Street. At its end, turn right along Seething Lane to reach St. Olave's Church. St. Olave's Church. St. Olave's is best known for its connections with the great London diarist Samuel Pepys. But the first thing you'll notice at its churchyard entrance is the sinister skulls carved into the pediment above the gate. They prompted Charles Dickens to rechristen this church St. Ghastly Grim in his magazine column The Uncommercial Traveller. The building you see today dates from about 1450, but a wooden church stood here long before that. Hence the dedication to St. Olaf, the Norwegian king who is said to have helped King Ethelred the Unready defend the city from the rampaging Vikings at the Battle of London Bridge in 1014. Some think Olaf's tearing down of the bridge to thwart King Canute's forces inspired the popular nursery song London Bridge is Falling Down. An inscription beside the gate records that another storybook figure, the mysterious Mother Goose, was buried at St. Olave's in 1586. So was Mary Ramsay in 1665, supposedly the woman who brought the Great Plague to London. In total, 365 plague victims are listed in the parish register. Samuel Pepys worshipped here during that era. Today his bust gazes across the graveyard, and if the church is open, you'll also find his beloved wife Elizabeth installed on the north wall so that Pepys could see her from his favourite pew. Another notable feature is a stained glass window portraying Elizabeth I. The Virgin Queen held a service here in 1554 to give thanks for her release from the Tower of London, where she'd been imprisoned by her half-sister Mary. St Olave's was gutted by a Luftwaffe bomb in 1941, and such was the heat that even the church bells melted. They were recast from the recovered metal a few years later at the same Whitechapel bell foundry which had made the originals in 1694. Beyond St Olave's, turn left into Hart Street, noting the flamboyant Victorian exterior of the Ship pub as you head for Mark Lane, where you should turn right. As you walk along here, look out for a curious stone tower to the left, dwarfed by a distinctive top-heavy skyscraper. The skyscraper has been nicknamed the Walkie-Talkie. It was originally designed to reach 650 feet, but 130 feet was shaved off its height following protests. Even so, it was awarded the Carbuncle Cup for 2015 as the ugliest new building in the UK. The stone tower in the foreground, meanwhile, is all that remains of All Hallows Staining Church, built in 1320. The rest of it collapsed in 1671 after too many burials in its churchyard undermined the foundations. It's maintained by the Worshipful Company of Clothworkers, one of more than 100 medieval trade guilds that are still active in the City of London. Reaching Fenchurch Street, turn left and then take the first right along Fen Court. Soon you'll encounter a sculptural work commemorating the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade in 1807. Redolent of a slave auctioneer's plinth, or perhaps of a church pulpit, the monument was unveiled by Archbishop Desmond Tutu in 2008. This site was chosen in honour of John Newton, a slave ship captain who found God and mended his ways, working closely for the abolitionist cause beside the parliamentarian William Wilberforce. Reverend Newton served as rector of St Mary Woolnoth Church in nearby Lombard Street and wrote the hymn Amazing Grace in his spare time. Fen Court leads to Fenchurch Avenue. Turn left there to emerge under the steel and glass bulwarks of Lloyd's of London, with the building at 30 St Mary Axe, popularly known as the Gherkin, rearing up above the rooftops to your right. Lloyd's of London. Richard Rogers' new Lloyd's of London building was unveiled in 1986 and caused a sensation. Like the same architect's Pompidou Centre in Paris, it's designed inside out, with all the ducting and elevators on the exterior. That leaves a towering 4-storey space inside for the trading floor, home to the world's leading insurance market. Lloyd's began almost 3 centuries earlier in 1688, when merchants, sea captains and ship owners would gather to do business at Edward Lloyd's coffee shop in nearby Tower Street. It soon became known as a good place to insure your ship. Today, the 200 brokers at Lloyd's look after more than £25 billion worth of premiums each year, and their underwriting room is still presided over by the Lutine Bell, which was recovered from the lost frigate HMS Lutine in 1858. Traditionally, the bell was rung once when news arrived at Lloyd's of the loss of a ship, and twice if a missing ship returned. These days, it's purely ceremonial, and tolls to mark the death of a member of the royal family, or to commemorate disasters such as the Asian tsunami or the 9/11 atrocity in New York. Lloyd's reputation as a global insurer was boosted after the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, which destroyed 80% of that city. Lloyd's underwriter Cuthbert Heath famously instructed his agent there to pay all of our policyholders in full, irrespective of the terms of their policies. In the 20th century, Lloyd's has underwritten all manner of surprising assets, including Marlene Dietrich's legs, Bruce Springsteen's vocal cords, Keith Richards' fingers and Egon Ronay's taste buds. Turn left outside Lloyd's along Lime Street, and then first right on Leadenhall Place into Leadenhall Market, your next stop on this walk. Leadenhall Market. From Dick Whittington to Harry Potter, lantern-lit Leadenhall Market has 600 years of history, and it really looks the part. The warren of cobbled arcades is encased in fancy ironwork and glass, its pillars painted in carousel colours, cream, claret and green. Dragons guard every corner, and there are tipsy old taverns and shoeshine stands. It feels like walking into a Victorian kaleidoscope. The centre of Roman Londinium was here. The remains of the city's first-century basilica now lie buried beneath the Lamb Tavern, which you'll see on the right-hand corner. It was the largest Roman basilica anywhere north of the Alps, as long as modern St. Paul's Cathedral. A meat and fish market first occupied the courtyards of a lead-roofed manor house here in the 14th century. In 1411, the wealthy merchant Dick Whittington, of pantomime fame, gifted Leadenhall to the City of London. And by 1800 it was Europe's best-supplied market, specialising in beef and game. Look out for the old meat hooks, survivors from Victorian times, when these arcades would have been full of live animals, including old Tom the gander, who escaped the butcher's block and became the market's mascot. Fed by the local inns, Tom died in 1835, aged 38, and lay in state at Leadenhall for all to admire. The ornate arcades you see today were designed in 1881 and now host deli-style butchers and cheesemongers, slick brasseries and bars, although they tend to fall silent at weekends when all the city workers go home. Turn left at the Lamb Tavern, and when the cobbled lane begins to bend to the left, divert right into Bull's Head Passage. Here's where Leadenhall's Harry Potter connection comes in, because in 2001, this passageway was transformed into Diagon Alley, where Harry buys his wand in the first movie in the blockbuster cycle. Bull's Head Passage opens onto Gracechurch Street. Cross over there and take another alleyway into Bell Inn Yard. This maze of passages has changed little in atmosphere since Victorian times, and by turning first right into St. Michael's Alley, you'll emerge by the gardens of St. Michael Cornhill Church. Aim left here to reach the clay-coloured Jamaica Wine House, which occupies the site of London's first coffee shop, Pasqua Roses, opened in 1652. For 200 years, this area was the life and soul of city society, where bankers and merchants would meet in the coffee houses to talk and trade. On the opposite corner, you'll see the George and Vulture, a venerable old city inn which was popular with the likes of Jonathan Swift and Charles Dickens. Dickens featured it in his first novel, The Pickwick Papers, in 1836. A century earlier, the same inn was the meeting place for Sir Francis Dashwood's infamous Hellfire Club. A drinking club for high society rakes and playboys, it became notorious for banqueting, wenching, and perhaps even satanic rites. Today, the George and Vulture's menu remains reassuringly traditional. Barnsley chops, liver and bacon, steak and kidney pie. Turn left along St. Michael's Alley here and continue straight ahead through George Yard to emerge on Lombard Street. In Tudor times, this was the richest street in London, lined with banks and goldsmiths' premises. And if you look to the right, you'll see a cat and fiddle suspended outside number 24. It's one of the last of the signboards that once hung in their scores along Lombard Street to advertise the businesses within. In the 17th century, you'd also have seen signs depicting a spread eagle and a black horse here. They were later adopted as the logos of Barclays and Lloyds banks. Cross Lombard Street and take Clements Lane, almost opposite. At the end, turn left along King William Street and take the subway stairs on the next corner, descending beneath the busy road junction. Follow the arrows to Monument Station and past the station barriers, resurfacing under the imperious white column of the monument itself, raised here in the 1670s to remember the Great Fire of London. Monument. More than 3 centuries before the advent of the London Eye, it was possible to admire the city's skyline from 160 feet aloft. The view from the top of the monument is hard-earned, however. You'll need to climb up 311 corkscrewing steps to reach the caged platform at the pinnacle. The Doric column was designed by Robert Hooke and Christopher Wren in the aftermath of the Great Fire that devastated London in September 1666, and it must have been a marvel in its day. It occupies the site of St. Margaret's Fish Street, the first city church to succumb to the flames, and stands not just 202 feet high, but exactly 202 feet west of where the fire originally broke out, in a bakery on Pudding Lane. Pace out that distance across the square, and you'll find a plaque on an office building which marks the spot. Within 3 days, the Great Fire of London had turned most of the medieval city to ashes, including 13,000 houses, 87 churches, and St. Paul's Cathedral. At that time, London was still enclosed by the 18-foot-high walls built by the Romans, and there were just 8 narrow gates as escape routes. So while only 6 deaths were officially recorded after the fire, modern historians believe that many poor folk may have perished in the inferno, their fate unremarked. The good news was the fire also finished off the Great Plague, which had wiped out 100,000 Londoners the year before. Today, the monument remains the world's tallest freestanding stone column, and it still has the power to impress. Christopher Wren built a laboratory in its basement and dangled a pendulum down into the stairwell to conduct scientific experiments, but the rumble of traffic made that impractical, and soon the monolith was open for visitors to enjoy. If you've got the legs for it, the climb is very worthwhile. You'll emerge among the dazzling spires and skyscrapers of 21st century London. There's a certificate for everyone who makes it down again intact. Afterwards, retrace your steps through the subway to King William Street and keep going along it, passing St. Mary Woolnoth Church, to reach a busy junction dominated by the Royal Exchange and the Bank of England. Bear right here, crossing Cornhill, to admire the horseback statue of the Duke of Wellington. The Bank of England. You're now standing at Bank Junction, the nerve centre of London's financial district. Dominating this intersection is the extravagant portico of the Royal Exchange Building, with its 8 Corinthian columns. The royal in question was Queen Elizabeth I, who opened the Exchange in 1571 as a base for city trading, making it the first specialist commercial building in the country. At first, only goods could be exchanged here. Stockbrokers were excluded because of their rude manners, and they worked from nearby coffee houses instead. Later, the building hosted the Lloyd's Insurance Market, and in recent years, its central trading court has been thrown over to expensive restaurants and boutiques. The accession of a new monarch is traditionally proclaimed from its steps. The Exchange Building has twice gone up in flames, in the Great Fire of 1666 and again in 1838, and the stately facade you see today dates from 1844, when the statue of the Duke of Wellington, astride his warhorse Copenhagen, was also installed here on the forecourt. Unveiled to mark the anniversary of Wellington's victory over Napoleon at Waterloo, the monument was cast using bronze from captured French cannon. Wellington was a famously austere figure, and after retiring from military campaigning, he continued to prefer sleeping in a camp bed. He went on to become Britain's Prime Minister, though his popularity waned when he opposed calls for voting reform in 1830, prompting riots on the streets of the capital. He swiftly erected iron shutters to protect his London home, Apsley House, which gave rise to his popular nickname, the Iron Duke. Wellington's prized stallion, meanwhile, was a hero in his own right. Fashionable ladies wore brooches made from his hair, and when Copenhagen died, he was buried with full military honours. Now walk along the left-hand side of the Royal Exchange Building and cross Threadneedle Street at the zebra crossing, taking Bartholomew Lane to circle the Bank of England building. The Bank of England moved to this site in 1734, but was founded before that in 1694. It was privately owned, but was created to lend capital to the government, specifically the £1.2 million that King William III needed to bankroll his war against France. You may have noticed that as well as being set on an island site to strengthen its security, the bank has no windows on its ground floor. This formidable curtain wall that was built around the current 3-acre island in 1788 is the work of architect Sir John Soane. Above ground, its size may seem modest, but its underground vault is immense. The gold reserves held there are reckoned to be worth more than £150 billion, and the keys to the vault measure 3 feet long. The bank was nationalised in 1946, and these days it has a monopoly on issuing banknotes in England and Wales, plus independent control over UK monetary policy, except in extreme economic circumstances, when the government of the day can intervene. Mark Carney, a Canadian, became the bank's first foreign governor in 2013. As you walk along Bartholomew Lane, you'll see the entrance to the bank's museum, which is free and well worth a look. It's a surprisingly entertaining place, with interactive gadgets to entertain younger visitors and a gold ingot worth £300,000, which you can try your hand at lifting. Look out too for a showcase featuring Ratty and Mole, creations of the Wind in the Willows author Kenneth Grahame, who spent 30 years as secretary of the bank from 1879 to 1908. Move on along Bartholomew Lane and turn left onto Lothbury. Cross into Gresham Street from Lothbury and look for a right turn into Guildhall Yard, the next stop on this walk. The Guildhall. In front of you across the courtyard is the Guildhall, the seat of government in the City of London for centuries. It was first documented in 1128, but this building dates from the 15th century. And inside, the medieval Great Hall survives intact, along with crypts, a library and print room. In Tudor times, trials were held here, and the likes of Lady Jane Grey, the 17-year-old 9-day queen, were condemned to death. These days, the hall is home to the giant effigies of Gog and Magog, the legendary guardians of London, who are paraded every November amid much pomp and ceremony at the Lord Mayor's show. Look around and you'll see that Guildhall Yard is menaced on all sides by dragons, the City of London's armorial emblem. And on the right of the courtyard stands one of the capital's most underrated attractions, the Guildhall Art Gallery. Admission is free, and inside you'll find the biggest painting in Britain, John Singleton Copley's eye-popping Siege of Gibraltar from 1791, so vast that it occupies 2 floors. Also look out for the pre-Raphaelite artist John Everett Millet's funny portraits of his daughter dozing off in church. The gallery's unmissable attraction came to be here by accident, though, and it lurks in a dark cavern in the basement. It's the ruins of London's 2,000-year-old Roman amphitheatre, which was stumbled upon by archaeologists when the gallery was being built in 1988. This was the largest public arena in Roman Britannia, and up to 6,000 spectators would gather here to watch bloody animal fights, public executions, and gladiatorial combat fought to the death. Only scant foundations of the Colosseum survive, but you'll hardly notice that, because spotlights and sound effects now do a great job of bringing the arena to life. Stride in through the eastern entrance, as gladiators did long ago, past the pens used to hold wild beasts, and take in the deafening roar of the crowd. Head back outside the gallery to look for a bust of the cloth merchant Dick Whittington in the corner of the courtyard. Now better known for his role in fairy tales and pantomimes, Whittington was Lord Mayor 4 times between 1397 and 1419, and a great London benefactor. He financed drainage systems, a hospital ward for unmarried mothers, and even a public toilet nicknamed Whittington's Longhouse, which seated 128 and was flushed by the River Thames at high tide. Although not from poor stock, as the legend suggests, Whittington may well have liked cats. In his will, he paid for one to be carved above the gate of Newgate Prison. Depart Guildhall Yard the same way you entered, taking a quick look at the Church of St. Lawrence Jewry, designed by Christopher Wren in 1680. A plaque tells how it was almost completely destroyed by fire in 1940, as a result of action by the King's enemies. Quitting Guildhall Yard, take King Street directly opposite. This leads to busy Cheapside, where you should turn right to find St. Mary le Bow Church on the left. St. Mary le Bow Church. There's been a church on this site all the way back to Saxon times. History recounts that one early incarnation was destroyed by a devastating tornado in the year 1091. In Norman times, St. Mary le Bow served as the London headquarters of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and in the intervening years the church has acquired a host of stories. According to legend, the sound of its bells called back a despondent Dick Whittington to find his fortune, and it's said that to qualify as a true-born Londoner, or Cockney, you must be born within the sound of the Bow bells. If you come here in September, you might encounter a gaggle of so-called pearly kings and queens, who gather at this church for their annual harvest festival. They decorate their suits in pearl buttons, a century-old tradition that grew from the Cockney market traders' habit of sewing buttons along their trouser seams. For almost 1,000 years, Cheapside was London's main shopping street, and new monarchs would process along it to their coronations, hence the so-called royal box on the church tower outside, which was retained by Sir Christopher Wren when he rebuilt St. Mary le Bow after the Great Fire of London. Gaze up to the top of the spire and you'll also see a resplendent golden dragon fully 9 feet long. Today, the interior of the church is cool and contemporary. It was remodelled yet again after suffering a direct hit during the Blitz in 1941. It's time for your walk's grandstand finish. Head left along Cheapside from outside St. Mary le Bow and cross into the gardens of St. Paul's Cathedral. St. Paul's Cathedral. Boasting Britain's biggest bell, Europe's largest crypt, and a dome weighing 64,000 tons, St. Paul's is a superlative building, arguably the most spectacular church in the country. Its shadowy crypt is full of historical famous names, including the Duke of Wellington, Florence Nightingale, and Admiral Nelson, who lies in a coffin hollowed out of a defeated French flagship. The man who designed the cathedral is buried here too, the great Renaissance architect Sir Christopher Wren. His epitaph reads, "If you seek his memorial, look around you." St. Paul's is the 5th cathedral to stand here on Ludgate Hill, and it was Wren's crowning achievement, paid for thanks to the coal tax levied by King Charles II to fund the rebuilding of London after the Great Fire. It took 40 years to finish, by which time Wren was aged 78, so his son was lifted in a basket to lay the final stone. At 364 feet, the cathedral remained London's loftiest building for the next 250 years, although it was never as tall as its medieval predecessor, Old St. Paul's, as you'll see if you check out the model of the earlier cathedral in the crypt. Begun in the 11th century, its spire reached a towering 489 feet. Wren designed his version in English Baroque style, and his plan to cap it with an enormous dome gave him an engineering headache. The structure weighs as much as 50,000 elephants, so Wren cleverly designed a dome within a dome to help bear the load. If you visit today, you'll be able to scale 259 steps into the so-called Whispering Gallery, whose curious acoustics mean the slightest whisper can be heard all the way around the walkway, turning the dome into an atmospheric echo chamber. You can opt to climb even higher too, a further 269 steps to reach the Golden Gallery with its spellbinding views across the rooftops of London. The cathedral's visitor entrance is at the western end, So aim left now around the southern side of the building through the festival gardens with their fountains and sunken lawn. Not far from here, in 1606, Guy Fawkes and some of his conspirators were hung, drawn and quartered for their part in the gunpowder plot. As you circle St. Paul's, look for the pediment above the grand south door, which is adorned with a phoenix and the Latin inscription, Resurgam, I shall rise again. The cathedral's southwest tower is home to Great Paul, Britain's largest bell, which tolls the hour at 1 p.m. daily. The steps to the grand west door have witnessed many great state occasions, from the funerals of Admiral Nelson and Winston Churchill to the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer in 1981. A look around the cathedral makes a fitting climax to your walk. The cathedral is open to visitors every day except Sundays. If you do take the tour, be sure to check your guidebook for a map of the tombs on page 154 to 155. That's the end of your DK Eyewitness Travel Guide walk. I hope you've enjoyed the rich history of the City of London. Royal London. Welcome to this DK Eyewitness Travel Guide walk. For more information on the areas covered in this walk, check your guide between pages 72 and 101. 4 royal palaces, both medieval and modern, and the very first royal park. This part of central London has been the seat of the nation's power for a millennium. Today's walk begins with the mother of parliaments, in the shadow of one of the city's greatest icons, Big Ben. You'll also get to visit Westminster Abbey, Nelson's Column and Buckingham Palace. Not to mention finding out where the Queen's husband gets his hair cut. This is Picture Postcard London, full of history and with a pelican or two thrown in for luck. The Houses of Parliament. Begin your walk right in the middle of grassy Parliament Square and turn to admire the golden pinnacles of the Houses of Parliament. Take a few strides backwards and you'll see not just the Tower of Big Ben, but to its left, London's latest skyline icon, the Shard Tower, piercing the sky beyond Westminster Bridge. Parliament has been the nation's seat of government since 1265, but it began life as London's first royal palace in the 11th century, and it's still officially called the Palace of Westminster today. It has 100 staircases and 1,100 rooms, but the only original part to survive is Westminster Hall, the building with the pitched roof right in front of you, closest to the road. It was built in 1097 under the orders of King William Rufus, the son of William the Conqueror, and it hasn't changed much since then. Guy Fawkes was tried here. Sir Winston Churchill lay in state, and Henry VIII's tennis ball was recovered from its rafters nearly 400 years after it got stuck there. In fact, Henry was the last king to reign from here. He moved his court just up the road to the new Whitehall Palace in 1512. Today, Westminster Hall acts as a grand entrance lobby for Parliament. Guided tours run every Saturday and on weekdays in summer. When members of Parliament are sitting, it's also possible to attend a debate. They're often pretty raucous, especially on Wednesday lunchtimes for the weekly session of Prime Minister's Questions. The Catholic plotter Guy Fawkes failed in his bid to blow up King James I and his government in 1605, but the medieval palace did go up in smoke more than 200 years later in 1834. The result was the building you're looking at now, designed in outlandish Victorian Gothic style by Charles Barry. Bookending the palace on the far right is Victoria Tower, which stores more than 3 million laws. That's every Act of Parliament since 1497, and they're still written on goatskin. To the far left, of course, rises Big Ben, although that's not the name of the tower, nor of the clock, but of the 14-ton bell inside it, which has been chiming the hour since 1859. Some say its distinctive sound is caused by a crack. You're looking at the largest four-phase chiming clock in the world. Its minute hand is 14 feet long. Timekeeping is regulated by adding to or subtracting from a stack of old English pennies that rest on the pendulum. The statue in front of Parliament, across to your right, is of Oliver Cromwell, the only commoner ever to overthrow the monarchy after the English Civil War in 1649. But the Queen still owns the palace and arrives in her coach each November to attend the official state opening of Parliament. If you book for a guided tour on arrival at the ticket office, you'll follow her route through the building, and you'll also visit St. Stephen's Hall, where Spencer Perceval was shot dead in 1812, becoming Britain's only assassinated Prime Minister. You'll pass through the central lobby too, where the statue of Churchill has strangely shiny shoes. It's considered good luck for MPs to rub them as they enter the House of Commons chamber. The chamber itself is a surprisingly small space, just 65 feet long. Its green benches can seat only 427 of the UK's 650 MPs. It's the only place in London that the monarch is not allowed to enter. But you can, and you're even allowed to stand at the Prime Minister's dispatch box. Parliament Square. Now explore the statues here on Parliament Square, beginning in the corner nearest to Big Ben, where Winston Churchill glowers in his navy greatcoat. The square was laid out in 1868 to open up the view of Parliament, and it became London's first official roundabout in 1926. As you'll have noticed by now, traffic still rules here today. Churchill's statue is twice life-size, and was unveiled by his 88-year-old widow, Lady Clementine, in 1973. It commands a spot that Churchill himself described once as "where my statue will go." Heading anti-clockwise around the square, you'll next encounter David Lloyd George in his billowing cape. Britain's only Welsh Prime Minister, Lloyd George introduced the country's first old age pensions in 1908 and state support for the ill and unemployed. Then comes Jan Smuts, the South African Field Marshal who helped to found the RAF and the United Nations. Keep going to find the Earl of Derby, who was Prime Minister 3 times, and whose Reform Act of 1867 gave every male householder the vote. You'll also meet a tight-trousered Robert Peel, the Prime Minister who founded the world's first police force. They were nicknamed Bobbies in his honour. And finally, Nelson Mandela, who first arrived in London to address both Houses of Parliament in 1993, a year before becoming South African President. Mandela was also here to see his likeness unveiled in 2007, making this a very rare example of a London statue erected during its subject's lifetime. The most recent addition to the square, though, is Mahatma Gandhi, facing Parliament in his wire-rimmed specs and sandals. His monument was added in 2015, though it's fair to assume that Churchill would not approve. A strong opponent of Indian independence, he once called Gandhi a seditious Middle Temple lawyer, now posing as a fakir. Cross the road beside the Mandela statue and head through the gates towards the north door of Westminster Abbey. The entrance to St. Margaret's Church is on your left, and you can look inside for free. St. Margaret's Church. There has been a church here since the 12th century, and this third incarnation was consecrated in 1523. For the last 400 years, it's been the official worshipping place of the House of Commons, which means MPs are allowed to marry here. Among those who've taken up the invitation are the Prime Ministers Harold Macmillan in 1920 and Winston Churchill, who wed his American bride Clementine Hozier in 1908. If you venture inside, look out for plaques reserving the pews for the Speaker of the House at the front and for MPs behind. William Caxton, England's first printer, was buried here in 1491, and the adventurer Sir Walter Raleigh is interred in front of the altar, having lost his head in nearby Old Palace Yard in 1618. In 1585, Raleigh sponsored the first English colony in America on Roanoke Island in modern North Carolina, and the window above the west door was dedicated to his memory by Americans. The great diarist of the Fire of London, Samuel Pepys, got married here in 1655, and 6 years later, after the restoration of the monarchy, parliamentarians who had been buried in Westminster Abbey under Oliver Cromwell's rule were dug up and thrown into a pit at St Margaret's on the orders of King Charles II. You can't see it from here, but the outer wall at the far end of the church also sports a bust of his father, Charles I, eyeing his nemesis Cromwell, the man who separated him from his body. We'll meet him again later in this walk. This church's greatest treasure, though, is its east window above the altar, made 500 years ago in Flemish stained glass to celebrate the betrothal of Henry VIII to Catherine of Aragon in 1509. They are portrayed in the corner panes at the bottom. Or could it be Henry's older brother, Prince Arthur, who married Catherine 8 years earlier? Historians can't seem to agree. Westminster Abbey. Having explored St Margaret's Church, turn to face the great north door of Westminster Abbey, with its Madonna and Child guarded by gargoyles and dragons. Above, immense flying buttresses support the Abbey's 102-foot-tall nave, the loftiest in England. William the Conqueror was crowned at Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day 1066, while his henchmen swung their swords at the rowdy onlookers outside. Ever since, this has been the coronation site of monarchs. 39 kings and queens in total, including the current Queen, Elizabeth II, in 1953. Since 1308, every one of them has been crowned on St Edward's chair, the throne made for Edward I in 1300, which you'll see if you go inside. The original abbey was founded here in the year 620 by the Saxon king Sebert, but the very devout King Edward the Confessor started afresh in 1050, and so did Henry III 2 centuries later, determined to create the most magnificent church ever seen. Edward's was the first of many royal burials here. Others include Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, who cuddles in the same tomb as her Catholic half-sister, Bloody Mary. You won't find monks at Westminster Abbey today. Elizabeth's father, Henry VIII, ejected the Benedictine Brethren in 1540 after he broke with the Pope and formed his own church. But the building was spared from desecration because Henry declared it a cathedral, perhaps in honour of his father, Henry VII, whose tomb is arguably the Abbey's greatest masterpiece. Its intricate fan vaulting was described by Washington Irving as having the wonderful minuteness and airy security of a cobweb. Also remembered inside are great scientists and musicians, including Sir Isaac Newton and George Frederick Handel. Dick Whittington and his cat feature in one of the windows, and you'll also see the Tomb of the Unknown Warrior, brought from the battlefields of the Western Front in 1920 to commemorate all lives lost in war. Geoffrey Chaucer, the author of the Canterbury Tales, was the first to be buried in the Abbey's Poets' Corner around the year 1400, later to be joined by Samuel Johnson, Lord Tennyson, Rudyard Kipling, Laurence Olivier, and Charles Dickens, though Dickens was given a secret funeral in accordance with his will. The playwright Ben Jonson, meanwhile, was buried standing up, reputedly because he couldn't afford a plot big enough to stretch out in. There's still more to explore on page 80 of your guide. Now walk to your right to find the ticket booth outside the Abbey's soaring west towers, added to the building by the architect Nicholas Hawksmoor as late as 1745, though you can barely see the join. Visiting the Abbey is expensive, so allow yourself a couple of hours inside at least. And don't miss the creepy wax museum in the vaults, lined with royal effigies that were used in Tudor funeral processions. Broad Sanctuary, behind you as you face the Abbey, is where the horse-drawn state carriage whisked Prince William and Catherine Middleton, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, away from their wedding at the Abbey in 2011, among cheering crowds. Cross the road here, taking Little George Street across the top of Parliament Square and turning left into Great George Street. En route, you'll pass the extravagant frontage of Middlesex Guildhall, the home of Britain's Supreme Court. Its Edwardian frieze features King John and his medieval barons signing the Magna Carta. As you go, look out too for the statue of Abraham Lincoln under the trees on your right. Mr. President stands in front of his chair instead of sitting as he does in Washington, D.C. A bronze of Margaret Thatcher has been cast to join him nearby, but it's in storage, reportedly because the Iron Lady's daughter objected to the sculptor's omission of her famous handbag. Turn left into Great George Street, and then first right into Horse Guards Road, where just after the Treasury Building you'll find your next stop, the Churchill War Rooms. The Churchill War Rooms. To your right now, at the foot of some stately steps, a modest black portal marks the entrance to the Churchill War Rooms. What lies beneath here is a fascinating time capsule, the underground labyrinth where Winston Churchill ran Britain's campaign against the Nazis during World War II. The Warren of Vaults was designed to withstand enemy bombs, and just as well, since the House of Commons was smashed by a direct hit during the Blitz in 1941, wrecking the debating chamber. The rooms became the nerve centre for receiving secret messages from the front, and some clerks and codebreakers lived there like moles almost full-time, sleeping in a dungeon-like dock under a trapdoor. They even had sun lamp treatment to guard against vitamin D deficiency. Apart from the addition of a few shop-dummy typists and military men pinning labels on maps, the rooms remain frozen in time, complete with original clutter, musty smells and shadowy corners. Churchill's own bedchamber looks like he's just popped out for a quick cigar, which is quite possible, since he liked to climb onto the rooftops during Luftwaffe raids and observe the carnage. The War Rooms are now run as a satellite of the Imperial War Museum, and a visit here also includes the adjoining Churchill Museum, a 21st century space that uses sound, film and touchscreen wizardry to canter through Churchill's career. Now cross the road into St. James's Park and follow the path that hugs the left side of its lake. Pause by the Tiffany Fountain. St. James's Park. Now surrounded by 3 palaces, St. James's was London's first royal park. Originally a swampy area used for deer hunting by Henry VIII, a century later it was tamed into formal gardens by King James I, the great colonizer of America and the first monarch to style himself as King of Great Britain and Ireland. James filled the park with his menagerie, including 5 camels, a crocodile and an elephant with a penchant for red wine. He also kept an aviary of exotic birds along what's now called Birdcage Walk, the street that borders the park on your left. James's grandson, Charles II, redesigned the lawns here in the style of the fashionable French gardens he'd seen while in exile, and opened them to the public for the first time. The king liked to mingle with his subjects, feeding the ducks. You can still do that today, or perhaps hire a deck chair, listen to a brass band, or eat an ice cream. This is central London's most popular pleasure ground, attracting 5.5 million visitors a year, and it's the city's only major park not to be surrounded by railings. To your right as you entered, you may have spotted a picturesque chalet, a tiny fragment of Switzerland among the grandiose government buildings all around. This is Duck Island Cottage, built in 1841 as a home for the St. James's Park birdkeeper, a post that still exists today. And there are still plenty of unusual birds to look out for as you stroll along the lake, including cormorants and herons. More than 30 species of wildfowl breed here in all, but the lords of the park are undoubtedly its great white pelicans, which have often been known to quit the water and share a bench with somewhat startled park-goers. The first pelicans arrived here in 1664 as a gift from the Russian ambassador. The diarist John Evelyn, writing a year later, reported that King Charles II also kept a crane with a wooden leg. The ambassador's gift kicked off a tradition, and 4 pelicans live in St James's Park today. Return to this spot at 2:30 p.m. if you'd like to watch the keepers feeding them their fish. From the Tiffany Fountain, continue along the left-hand side of the lake until you reach the Blue Bridge. The view across the water from here is one of the most romantic in London. Looking back in the direction you've come from, the domes of Whitehall rise out of the water, and the great white halo of the London Eye frames the Shard below. Drink it in, then turn the other way for a glimpse of the neoclassical pomp of Buckingham Palace peeping through the trees. Continue your waterside route, circling the foot of the lake, then branching first left past a snack kiosk up to the Mall, turning left to approach the Queen Victoria Memorial. The Victoria Memorial. Staring imperiously down the Mall, London's great princely processional route, this statue of Victoria was sculpted by Thomas Brock in 1911, 10 years after the Queen's death. Her grandson, King George V, clearly liked it, as Brock was knighted at its unveiling ceremony. At around 80 feet tall, it's the tallest monument to a monarch in England, and it's also a hymn to empire, topped by the gilded figure of victory and with statues at its corners representing attributes that made the nation great: peace, progress, agriculture and manufacturing. An appeal to pay for the monument included £25,000 given by the Australian government and £15,000 from New Zealand. West African nations even sent goods to be sold to boost the coffers. In fact, so much money was collected that the fund also paid for the architect Sir Aston Webb to build Admiralty Arch, which crowns the other end of the Mall behind you, and to reface the entire facade of Buckingham Palace. In 2012, the monument served as a stage for Queen Elizabeth II's Diamond Jubilee concert, starring everyone from Sir Elton John to Sir Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder. Also Madness, who performed their song Our House on the Buckingham Palace rooftop. Now cross the Mall and circle right towards the enormous golden portal of Canada Gate. Pause at the gates for a good look at Buckingham Palace. Buckingham Palace. If you have time, take a moment to review page 98 of your guide for more history on Buckingham Palace, or page 56 to learn about the ceremonies, like the changing of the guard. Thousands of visitors press their noses to its gilded railings every year, but Buckingham Palace is relatively new. It became the full-time home and headquarters of the royal family during Queen Victoria's reign. Since 1993, the palace has been open to the public too, which is only proper, since it belongs to the nation, not to the Crown. The palace began life in 1703 as a grand mansion for the first Duke of Buckingham, hence its name. It was acquired by King George III in 1762 as an escape from the court at St James's Palace, which you'll visit shortly. Packed with priceless porcelain, jewelled cabinets and gold leaf, it owes its splendour to his son, George IV, a notorious big spender who came to the throne in 1820 and lavished a fortune on it. His architect, John Nash, remodelled the east front you're looking at now, designing a triumphal marble arch as its stately entrance. That arch was relocated in 1851, however, and now stands marooned among traffic at the corner of nearby Hyde Park. Queen Elizabeth II first moved in here as a 10-year-old princess, and now shares the palace with 350 staff, from cleaners to courtiers. Can you see the Royal Standard flying above the rooftop? If so, the Queen is at home. The visitor tour is only available in summer and takes in just 19 of the ceremonial staterooms, which is just as well. The palace has 775 rooms in all. You'll get to see 2 upholstered thrones, embroidered ER and P, presumably so that the Queen and Prince Philip don't forget where to sit. The tour also takes in the grand dining room, which seats 46. Royal footmen carry special rulers to make sure the cutlery and glassware are positioned perfectly. You'll also visit a ballroom big enough to hold 84 double-decker buses, where the Queen bestows knighthoods. Outside, meanwhile, is the largest private garden in London. It plays host to royal garden parties each summer, where guests guzzle through 27,000 cups of tea and 20,000 cakes. The sentries you can see standing stony-faced on the palace forecourt have occasionally been known to let their guards slip. In 1982, for example, the Queen woke to find a friendly intruder named Michael Fagan perched on her bed. He chatted to Her Royal Highness for half an hour before the police appeared. Now it's time to walk on to the historic area of St James's. Head diagonally right towards the edge of Green Park and turn left on a path along its eastern boundary. As you pass the white stuccoed mansion, take a black iron gate on the right, which leads you out of the park into Cleveland Row. Go straight ahead here and turn left into Little St James's Street, which curls right past the Duke's Hotel, said by some to serve London's best martini. You'll soon emerge on St James's Street, the next staging post on this walk. St James's. Now you find yourself in the fashionable district of St James's, which might be termed the back stairs of courtly London, and has been ever since King Henry VIII built St James's Palace here in the 1530s. Look around you now, and you'll see why. Immediately to your left, at number 71 St James's Street, is the royal blue frontage of Truefitt and Hill, gentleman perfumer and hairdresser since 1805, which proudly displays its royal warrant as barber to Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. A traditional wet shave here with a cut-throat razor will set you back £45. Right next door at number 69 stands the Carlton Club, its blue door reflecting its heritage as the Gentlemen's Club of the Conservative Party. Founded by Tory MPs in 1832, the club automatically invites new leaders of the party to become life members, a custom which in 1975 saw Margaret Thatcher declared an honorary man in order to preserve the tradition. Thatcher became Britain's first female premier 4 years later. Indeed, this area has been the home of London's clubland for 300 years. And further left along St James's Street lies Boodle's, a favourite of the writer Ian Fleming, who used it in his James Bond novels as the model for M's club, Blades. Nearby is the oldest and most exclusive club of all, White's, where both Prince Charles and Prince William are members, having taken their turn on the 2-year waiting list. But for now, we'll take the zebra crossing to examine the shops opposite Truefitt and Hill. At number 9, John Lobb have been bootmakers to kings and princes for more than a century. The American crooners Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra both had shoes handmade here too. Their personal lasts are kept in the basement. Next along you'll find James Lock, the hatter, in business here since 1764. It's said Admiral Nelson ordered a hat with a built-in eye patch from Lock's, and they also supplied the Duke of Wellington's plumed hat for Waterloo, as well as inventing the famous bowler hat favoured by city office workers. Don't ask to buy a bowler, however, because at Lock's it's referred to as a Coke, after Edward Coke, the first man to order one. Next comes Berry Brothers and Rudd, London's oldest wine merchant, where you wouldn't be surprised to see Bob Cratchit scribbling away in its wood-panelled interior. Pop your head in the door and you'll discern the company's enormous coffee scales, which in the 18th century were also famously used to weigh its customers. Ledgers record the heft of the poet Lord Byron, Admiral Horatio Nelson, and his mistress, Lady Hamilton. Berry Brothers and Rudd has been a wine shop since 1698, and it's said a secret tunnel in its cellars allowed 18th century royals from St James's Palace to sneak out and visit ladies of the night. Perhaps in the adjoining Pickering Place, which you'll find by ducking into a wood-panelled alleyway marked with the number 3. This is said to be England's smallest public square, and it became a notorious hotspot for gambling dens and duels in the dandy days of the Regency rake Beau Brummell, who is said to have liked his boots polished with champagne. The writer Graham Greene once lived in Pickering Place, and, as a plaque reveals, this was also the base for representatives of the independent Republic of Texas until it joined the United States in 1845. Reaching the corner with Pall Mall, cross carefully to admire the grand Tudor gatehouse of St. James's Palace opposite. St. James's Palace. Built in fashionable red brick by Henry VIII as a love nest to share with his new Queen, Anne Boleyn, St. James's Palace is still the British court's official headquarters to this day, although it's now occupied by the Queen's daughter, Princess Anne. In 1649, the doomed King Charles I spent his final night at the palace before being led across the park to the chopping block on Whitehall with his faithful spaniel Rogue trailing behind him. Then in 1688 another king was overthrown here, King James II, whose baby son had to be smuggled out of the palace in the arms of his mother, Queen Mary of Modena, who disguised herself as a washerwoman. The Chapel Royal inside the palace is where Queen Victoria married her beloved Prince Albert in 1840. St. James's also witnessed Elizabeth II's first speech as Queen in 1952, and the lying in state of Diana, Princess of Wales, after her death in a Paris car accident in 1997. The Palace Gatehouse that rises before you now is one of Tudor London's best surviving buildings. Turn left in front of the gates, then first right into Marlborough Road. Along here on the left, you'll find a touching monument to the fashionable and popular Alexandra of Denmark. For 40 years, Alexandra lived just behind this wall at Marlborough House as the long-suffering queen of King Edward VII, who was a notorious womanizer. This Art Nouveau memorial was sculpted in 1926 by Alfred Gilbert, more famous today for fashioning the statue of Eros at nearby Piccadilly Circus. Retrace your steps and turn right along Pall Mall. This street got its name from Pai Mai, a pastime similar to croquet. King Charles II was a big fan, having learned the game while exiled in France, and this was originally his playing field, until it became too thronged with traffic, and Charles moved his mallets to the Mall beside St. James's Park. Stick to the right-hand pavement, and as you go, count off the 13 antique lamp-posts that line the street. These were crafted from old musket barrels by the German inventor Frederick Windsor, who in 1807 made this the first public street in the world to be artificially lit with gas. Windsor's pioneering streetlights illuminated the way to St. James's Palace to celebrate King George III's birthday. This side of Pall Mall is dominated by the grand edifices of yet more gentlemen's clubs. The RAC Club at number 89 is where the spies Guy Burgess and Donald Maclean lunched before defecting to the USSR in 1951. Further along stands the Reform Club, where Jules Verne's plucky adventurer Phileas Fogg accepted the bet that sent him around the world in 80 days. Head now to your next stop, Waterloo Place. Waterloo Place. The square ahead and to your right is peopled with a multitude of famous folk, starting with the doyenne of nursing, Florence Nightingale, up on her plinth to your left. Nightingale stands alongside the man who first dispatched her to minister to British troops in the Crimea, the Victorian Secretary of War, Sidney Herbert. Turn right into Waterloo Place, noting the colossal columns of the Athenaeum Club on the near corner. This was a favourite club of Dickens, Thackeray and Kipling, as well as of Michael Faraday, the pioneer of electricity, whose wheelchair stands on a landing inside. The blue and white frieze you can see atop the second story is a copy of the Elgin marbles, plundered from the Parthenon in Athens in 1812, and today a controversial centrepiece of the British Museum. On the pavement across the square from the Athenaeum, outside what used to be the United Service Club, look for a raised curbstone. It's said to have been erected to help the aging Duke of Wellington to mount his horse. Along from here to the right, on the opposite side from the other statues, you'll find a statue of Robert Falcon Scott, the explorer, frozen in bronze. It was sculpted by his widow Kathleen 3 years after he died, while marching back from the South Pole in March 1912. Scott's team had made it to the bottom of the world that January, only to discover that their Norwegian rival, Roald Amundsen, had beaten them to it by 34 days. Standing roughly opposite Scott across the square stands a great Arctic navigator, John Franklin, who disappeared while looking for the Northwest Passage in 1847. Much feted by the Victorian public, Franklin was posthumously promoted to Rear Admiral of the Blue in 1852, and so many men and ships were lost on fruitless trips to find him that they eventually outnumbered Franklin's own expedition crew. One figure you really can't miss in Waterloo Place, however, is the Duke of York, dominating the scene atop his 125-foot-tall column. And he's your next target. This is the grand old Duke of nursery rhyme fame, who marched his men to the top of the hill and marched them down again. The second son of King George III, the Duke led the British Army throughout the Napoleonic Wars, but his field commands were not wild successes. They included a heavy defeat in Flanders, which is not known for its high ground, hence the sardonic rhyme. The Duke died £2 million in debt, and so this bombastic memorial was funded by deducting a day's pay from every man in the British Army, whether they liked it or not. Back then they could at least climb the 168 spiral steps inside the column and enjoy the view across London, but the gallery at the monument's summit has long since closed. Walk down the steps beneath the column into the Mall again, emerging by the Institute of Contemporary Arts, which was founded in 1947. Inspired by New York's Museum of Modern Art, the ICA was the first public gallery to stage a solo show by Damien Hirst. Famous for pickling sheep and sharks in formaldehyde, today Hirst is reckoned to be the UK's richest living artist. Cross the Mall by the gallery and take a path to the left of the Royal Artillery Memorial, which leads to Horse Guards Parade. As you go, look out for an ivy-draped building on your left. It's the Admiralty Citadel, a fortress built to serve as a final stronghold if the Nazis had invaded during World War II. It's ugly for sure, but it's said to be so bomb-proof that it can't be demolished. Horse Guards Parade. In Tudor times, the Royal Palace was here at Whitehall, and Horse Guards Parade began life as Henry VIII's jousting yard. Today, this great gravelled quadrangle forms the official entrance to Buckingham Palace, and that's why Her Majesty's Lifeguards stand sentry on the pavement beyond, as they've done for the last 200 years. You'll need to be here at 11 a.m. in the morning to watch the new guard trot in on horseback along the Mall from Hyde Park Barracks, their silver helmets glinting. The changing of the guard ceremony follows. A 15-minute silent standoff, followed by lots of bellowing as the old guard departs. Things come alive again at 4 p.m. when the troops dismount. Horse Guards is also the annual setting for the Trooping of the Colour ceremony, London's most eye-catching royal pageant, which is attended every June by the Queen to honour her official birthday. She was really born in April. The trees you can see peeking over the wall to your right stand in the garden of 10 Downing Street, home to the British Prime Minister. And beyond the parade ground, to the left of the main arch, you'll find the Household Cavalry Museum, featuring its own cobbled stables, where a glass wall allows you to look right in on the troops as they groom their steeds and prepare their kit. Anyone is allowed to walk through the Horse Guards archway ahead, and that's the way we're going now. But you can only drive through if you have a special ivory token from the Queen. As you emerge on the Whitehall side, spare a thought for the ever-stoical sentries manning the gates. These young guards spend 12 hours a day buffing their immaculate uniforms, and each morning the smartest soldier wins the right to be a mounted boxman, while the least polished is saddled with foot sentry duty. Whitehall is London's widest thoroughfare and the bustling heart of modern British government, lined with ministries of state. If you want to see Downing Street, head right along the street here. Otherwise, cross with care to Horse Guards Avenue, where on the right-hand corner you'll find Banqueting House. That's your next stop. Banqueting House. Banqueting House was designed in 1622 by the great Inigo Jones, who amazed London with the new neoclassical style of architecture he'd brought home from Italy. This was the first pure Renaissance building in London, and it's virtually the only bit of King Henry VIII's original Whitehall Palace to have survived a devastating blaze in 1698. Jones's patron was James I, who believed English kings were the divine agents of God. James threw dazzling masked balls in this building's vast gold and white hall, where actors dressed as devils and beasts would whirl above the audience or appear in flashes of fire, only for the monarch to miraculously restore order at the finale. Later, the king's son, Charles I, commissioned the Baroque master Peter Paul Rubens to paint the hall's mind-boggling ceiling, which shows King James rising gloriously to heaven. If you pay a visit today, lie down on your back and take in the full impact. It's the closest thing in London to the Sistine Chapel. If you're short on time, take a look on page 84 of your guide for a picture. All this showing off backfired on the Stuart dynasty, of course. Just 11 years after this splashy ceiling was finished, Charles I was marched out onto a banqueting house balcony and beheaded for treason. Look for his bust above the visitor doorway, underneath the spot where he was decapitated. To conclude your walk, head left now along Whitehall to reach modern London's great public showpiece, Trafalgar Square. When you get there, cross carefully to the base of Nelson's Column. Trafalgar Square. As monumental playgrounds go, Trafalgar Square, with its splashing mermaids and snarling lions, is just about as grand as it gets. This has been the official centre of London for 700 years, ever since King Edward I erected the original Charing Cross here to remember his dead queen, Eleanor of Castile. Occupying that same spot now, on its own mini roundabout close to where you enter the square, is an equestrian statue of Charles I, looking down Whitehall towards the site of his beheading. Cast in 1633, it is Britain's oldest bronze statue, and it was given to a local brazier to be melted down after the king was deposed. Instead, the man cunningly hid it in his garden, and lived for years on the bronze trinkets he claimed to have forged from it. Peddling souvenirs remains a lucrative business in this part of London to this day. The square before you was pinned down by Nelson's Column in 1843, and from 150 feet above the hubbub, Britain's greatest naval commander gazes off in the direction of Portsmouth, the home of his flagship HMS Victory. Nelson's statue stands 18 feet tall, but it's artificially foreshortened so that he appears to be in perfect proportion from the ground. His great naval victories are remembered in the bronze panels on the plinth below, all cast from captured French cannons: Cape St. Vincent, the Nile, Copenhagen, and, of course, Trafalgar. In the latter, facing Whitehall, you may be able to spot a black sailor among Nelson's crew. History records there were 18 nationalities aboard HMS Victory, including 9 West Indians and an African sailor. The famous lions that guard the corners of the monument were 25 years late in arriving in Trafalgar Square, after the sculptor Edwin Landseer struggled to get a likeness. He eventually asked London Zoo to send a dead lion to his studio to lend him a hand. These days, people gather in Trafalgar Square at times of national celebration or mourning. It has hosted anti-apartheid rallies, World Cup victory parades, and a record-breaking performance by the world's largest coconut orchestra. In 2003, base jumper Gary Connery parachuted from the top of Nelson's Column in a stunt designed to draw attention to Chinese policies in Tibet. And in 2015, Disney paid £24,000 to light it up like a giant lightsaber to promote the latest Star Wars movie. In the far left corner of the square, you'll see the fourth plinth, vacant for decades because nobody could agree what to erect there. It's now a showcase for contemporary art, and in 2009 it hosted Antony Gormley's One and Other, which invited 2,400 ordinary people to occupy the podium for 1 hour each, with some eccentric results. 11 of the participants used their hour to propose marriage, 13 of them stripped naked, and 1 threw paper aeroplanes into the crowd. Other quirks to search for before you leave Trafalgar Square include sharks swimming among the dolphins in the fountains, and Britain's smallest police box across to the right, which was once used to keep a beady eye on public protests in the days before CCTV. It now serves as a store for cleaning equipment. If you're still eager to explore, the building at the top of the steps on the far side of the square is the National Gallery. It contains thousands of paintings, from Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers to Henry Rousseau's Tiger in a Tropical Storm. As always, there is more information in your guide on pages 108 to 111, with a floor plan and tour information. Happy wandering. South Bank. Welcome to this DK Eyewitness Travel Guide walk. For more information on this walk, turn to pages 188 to 195 and 278 to 279 in your guidebook. One day the South Bank may become permanently festive and the Thames cease to be the most one-sided river in Europe. Those words appeared in Punch magazine in 1951, after the wildly successful Festival of Britain had transformed the South Bank of the Thames into pleasure grounds and museum spaces, wowing visitors with the Skylon, a futuristic floating tower 300 feet high. Millions flocked for a blast of fun and an escape from the drabness of post-war Britain. Most of the festival buildings were dismantled, but 7 decades later, that magazine writer's wish has come true. Today, the South Bank is one of London's great playgrounds, packed with colour and culture all the way from the London Eye, the city's most popular tourist attraction, to Shakespeare's Globe, a faithful recreation of the Tudor Playhouse where Britain's greatest dramatist premiered his works. You'll visit both on this walk, as well as London's tastiest food market, its flagship theatre complex, and its greatest temple of modern art. There are plenty of options for eating and drinking along the way, including one bar set in a hidden rooftop garden overlooking the river. Your day begins beside Westminster Bridge, beneath the great white wheel of the London Eye. The London Eye. The term Ferris wheel barely does justice to the stylish London Eye. Rising fully 443 feet above the Thames, it was conceived by the architects Marks Barfield as their submission for a new city landmark to celebrate the millennium. And while the Eye was only supposed to operate for 5 years, it proved such a hit that it has stayed for good. Today, it attracts 3.75 million riders every year and is hands down London's #1 visitor draw. The setting is sensational too. Take a few steps back into Jubilee Gardens and you'll get a peerless view of a much older London icon, Big Ben, perfectly framed by the wheel. Beside you, meanwhile, the building between the Eye and Westminster Bridge is County Hall. For 60 years the HQ of the Greater London Council, and now a leisure complex hosting the Sea Life London Aquarium, the London Dungeon, and more. Today, the Eye remains the world's tallest cantilevered observation wheel. Its 80 spokes, made from 20,000 feet of cable, providing tension and strength. 2 200-foot cables support the entire structure, from the concrete bases you can see in Jubilee Gardens. On the day the first pieces arrived in 1999, there was a palpable air of excitement among Londoners. A couple of thousand tons of materials were floated up the Thames to the site, laid out flat on the water to be assembled, and finally raised to vertical. It was the largest object that had ever been lifted this way. Unfortunately, there was an embarrassing moment when a cable came loose in front of the world's media. British Airways was sponsoring the Eye at the time, so their main rival, Virgin Atlantic, made the most of it. Virgin's founder, Richard Branson, flew an airship over the wheel with the slogan, "BA can't get it up," in huge letters. The Eye opened to the public in 2000. It has one of the best views of the city, so it's well worth taking a 30-minute flight in one of its glass capsules, otherwise known as pods, which represent the 32 London boroughs. Each pod allows a 360-degree view, so you can look out over the snaking River Thames and see 25 miles to the horizon in all directions. On a clear day, you'll be able to see the Shard, London's tallest building, to the east, Wembley Stadium to the northwest, Windsor Castle to the west, and the television towers of Crystal Palace on the distant hills to the south. At night, the wheel is lit up in gorgeous changing colours that are sometimes themed for particular events. In December 2005, it turned pink to celebrate the first civil partnership ever performed on the wheel, while in 2011 it displayed the Union Jack colours to celebrate the wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton. Every year it's the focal point of the impressive New Year's Eve firework display that lights up the River Thames. If you decide to go up, you'll need to book your tickets in advance and hope for a sunny day or a clear night. One complete rotation takes 30 minutes, and the wheel turns slowly at only 11 inches per second. Although it turns continuously, it can be stopped for people who use a wheelchair or have limited mobility. After admiring the Eye, walk east along the riverside promenade, perhaps lingering to watch some of the eclectic singers, stilt walkers and street artists who congregate here. In summer there's even a carousel, and rising beyond Jubilee Gardens to your right, you'll see the great glass spire of the Shard, 1,000 feet tall and the loftiest building in Britain. Soon you'll arrive at Hungerford Bridge, your next stop. Hungerford Bridge. Hungerford Bridge is flanked on either side by the Golden Jubilee footbridges with their striking white pylons. They were designed in tribute to the Skylon, an architectural marvel that was the centrepiece of the nearby Festival of Britain in 1951. You'll get spectacular views of the Thames from both footbridges. The eastern one looks out across a panorama of city skyscrapers, while the western bridge is a great place to watch the sun go down behind the Houses of Parliament. The first bridge here opened in 1845. It was designed by the legendary engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel and named after Hungerford Market, which once stood on the site of Charing Cross Station. When that bridge was replaced by Sir John Hawkshaw's version in 1859, which you see today, the old chains were sent to Bristol to be reused on Brunel's famous Clifton Suspension Bridge. In 1996, the architects Lifschutz Davidson Sandilands won a competition to design a new pedestrian walkway to replace a dangerous footbridge running beside the railway line. Building the footbridges was challenging, though, because two underground lines passed right beneath the riverbed, making drilling in the support piles dangerous. There was also the risk of setting off unexploded World War II bombs that had been found buried in the mud nearby. After some major setbacks, the Golden Jubilee bridges finally opened in 2002. Today, 8.4 million pedestrians use the walkways each year. Instead of passing underneath the bridge, take the ramp to the right of the staircase. This leads straight to your next stop, the Royal Festival Hall. Royal Festival Hall. The Royal Festival Hall is the largest concert hall on the South Bank, and the first of several venues that make up the South Bank Centre, London's top arts complex. The others include the Purcell Room, Queen Elizabeth Hall, the Hayward Gallery and the Poetry Library. The hall is Grade 1 listed and considered one of the best brutalist buildings in London. Built in 1951 to anchor the Festival of Britain, it was the only festival venue designed to be permanent. These days, the Festival Hall hosts a vibrant programme of music, exhibitions and free performances. Some of the world's greatest musicians have performed here, including David Bowie, Frank Sinatra, Kate Bush, Miles Davis, Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan. The London Philharmonic Orchestra, the London Sinfonietta and the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment are all resident at the South Bank Centre, while Daniel Barenboim and Simon Rattle are among the world-class conductors who've appeared here. It's worth exploring the hall to find out who's appearing here soon, and also to check out its fascinating miniature museum, remembering the Festival of Britain. The artists and architects recruited to make the festival happen were all aged under 45, and their so-called Dome of Discovery featured everything from scientific marvels to gymnastic demonstrations, plus zones dedicated to pub games. More than 8 million people flocked to it, and the Deputy Prime Minister, Herbert Morrison, called it a tonic for the nation. Today, this site is still a crucible for creativity, and if you're here in the summer, you may have passed the Udderbelly, a pop-up performance venue on Jubilee Gardens in the form of an inflatable purple cow. The Festival Hall is a good place to stop for a drink or something to eat, or to browse in the shops. Outside, cafes and restaurants line the walkway on the western side, as well as the riverside promenade below. An outdoor food market round the back of the building on the Waterloo Station side happens every Friday, Saturday and Sunday. From the front exit, turn right to explore the rest of the South Bank Centre. The BFI South Bank. You've arrived at Waterloo Bridge, famously featured in the pop song Waterloo Sunset, a hit for the Kinks in 1967. As you pass underneath it, pause to browse the second-hand books that are usually stacked on tables here. You now find yourself right in front of the Riverside Bar of the BFI South Bank, the UK's leading repertory cinema, which specialises in independent films, movie classics and non-English language films. You can walk through the bar to the cinema, but the main entrance is around the far side of the building. The BFI complex grew out of a merger of the National Film Theatre, founded here in 1951 during the Festival of Britain, and the acclaimed Museum of the Moving Image, MoMI, which opened next door in 1988. The space now has 3 auditoria, a studio, gallery and shop, plus the Mediatek, a film library where you can log on at a viewing station and search the BFI's film and television archive, the largest in the world. Exit the BFI and return to the Riverwalk. The next building along to the east is the National Theatre. The National Theatre. The National Theatre is the country's largest theatre complex, designed by Dennis Lasden in bold brutalist style and opened in 1976. Inside, the 3 auditoria show a terrific mix of classic drama and new writing, offering something for everyone. The National Theatre Company was founded in 1963 under Sir Laurence Olivier, Britain's most famous 20th century actor. You can see a statue of him between Waterloo Bridge and the theatre, memorialised in his role as Shakespeare's Hamlet. The largest of the 3 theatres inside, an arena-style space, is named after him. Reduced-price tickets are sold in the foyer from 10 a.m. on the day of a performance. But whether or not you're here to see a play, it's worth dropping into the lobby area, a lively social space. Enjoy a drink or a meal, wander around a free art exhibition, or take in a free music gig in the early evening. Guided tours of the complex include a glimpse of the scenery workshops backstage, but you can get a look at them right now by heading for the Dorfman Theatre entrance on the far side of the building. Here, take a lift up to the Shirling high-level walkway, offering a fascinating balcony view of scene painters, prop makers and costume designers beavering away. Back on the riverside again, it's a short walk on to reach Oxo Tower Wharf. En route, you'll pass the ITV London studios, where the morning magazine show This Morning is filmed. And then Gabriel's Wharf, a beguiling courtyard filled with craft studios and cafes, another good spot for a break. This little oasis of alternative culture, with its murals and bike hire shop, exists here thanks to Coin Street Community Builders, a gang of residents who banded together in 1984 to save the site from property developers. If you're lucky and the tide is out, there's also a riverside beach here, a popular spot for sculptors to fashion remarkable creations in the sand. Oxo Tower Wharf. The Oxo Tower is a red brick structure underpinned by galleries and independent design shops, but it also offers one of the best free views of the city. At the bottom on the riverside, there are glass doors that lead through to some lifts. Ride the lift to the top of the tower, where you can walk through a brasserie to reach a viewing platform high above the Thames. Ask a waiter to point the way. From this balcony, you'll gaze out across the river to Temple Gardens, home of London's lawyers since the 14th century, which lies directly opposite. Pause the recording while you return to ground level. Then continue along the Riverside Walk as far as Blackfriars Bridge. On the way, you'll pass the gold-trimmed Sea Containers House, home to an upmarket hotel. After the Doggett's Coat and Badge pub on the corner, take the walkway under Blackfriars Road Bridge and restart this commentary before you reach the railway bridge. On the pier ahead of you, look up and you'll see the brightly coloured emblem of the former St Paul's Bridge, whose red Doric columns are still marooned in the Thames here. The bridge carried the Chatham and Dover railway line across to the former St Paul's Station, but by the 1920s it was too weak to carry modern trains, and it was dismantled in 1985. A newer bridge now serves the beautifully refurbished Blackfriars Station. Walking on, you'll soon reach the Founders Arms pub and the Bankside Gallery, which features regular exhibitions of its members' work. Press on here to reach Tate Modern, the best free show on the river. Tate Modern. This building started life as Bankside Power Station, an industrial behemoth looming beside the Thames. In the year 2000, it was converted into the Tate Modern, instantly lauded as one of the world's great contemporary art galleries. Prior to the opening of Tate Modern, the Tate's art collection was shown at 3 galleries: Tate St Ives, Tate Liverpool, and the Tate Gallery in London's Pimlico, since rebranded Tate Britain. Tate Modern is dedicated to 20th century art, and its mind-expanding collection includes works by Dali, Picasso, Matisse, Rothko and Warhol, as well as many acclaimed contemporary artists. It's a dynamic space, with airy rooms and huge installations. The gallery was a smash hit from the moment it opened, and 2016 saw the £260 million Switch House extension open, doubling the exhibition space to help soak up Tate Modern's 5 million annual visitors. Even if you don't have time to explore the collection today, Tate Modern is an amazing space, so pop in and marvel at the vast dimensions of the Turbine Hall. Louise Bourgeois was the first artist to exhibit here, with works including Maman, her monumental steel spider. Other shows have included Olivia Eliasson's 2003 Weather Project, which lit the Turbine Hall with a giant glowing sun, and Ai Weiwei's sunflower seeds, which filled the hall with 100 million handcrafted porcelain seeds in 2010. The tanks have 7 levels in all, with temporary exhibitions and permanent collections occupying levels 2, 3 and 4, and there's a superb restaurant on level 6. Switch House has 10 levels, with free displays on levels 3 and 4, and you can't visit without taking in the spectacular views over the City of London from the viewing platform at level 10. When you've had your fill, exit through the front entrance and turn right towards the Millennium Bridge. The Millennium Bridge. Directly outside Tate Modern, the slender Millennium Bridge vaults the river towards St Paul's Cathedral. The bridge is just over 1,000 feet long and opened as part of the city's Millennium celebrations, becoming the first new river crossing in central London since Tower Bridge opened in 1894. Its architects described it as a slender ribbon of steel by day, illuminated to form a glowing blade of light at night. But Londoners fondly know it as the Wobbly Bridge, after pedestrians felt it moving under their feet when it opened in June 2000. The big day brought an air of anticipation as crowds gathered, waiting to cross. But when thousands of people set off across the bridge, it started to sway slightly, and they began staggering. The wobble got worse, and before long people were almost falling over. It was an embarrassment for the bridge's creators, a combined effort by Foster and Partners, the sculptor Anthony Caro, and engineering firm Arup. For 3 days it became London's most popular tourist attraction, as visitors came to try out the wobble for themselves. The bridge was deemed unsafe and promptly closed for 18 months while engineers investigated. But what caused the unexpected swaying? After much research, engineers concluded that it was synchronized pedestrian footfall, the rhythmic footsteps of thousands of people marching in unison, like a Roman army. Up until then, engineers had known little about this phenomenon. Reinforcements were carried out, and the bridge finally reopened on the 23rd of February 2002. Architect Norman Foster said that if it wobbled again, he would throw himself off it, and the British media made the most of the occasion. One newspaper sent a model across with a plate of jelly, a rather unscientific test to find out whether it would wobble again. Walk up the ramp now and test out the bridge for yourself. Then return to Bankside and continue towards Shakespeare's Globe Theatre on the east side of the bridge. Shakespeare's Globe. Step through the ornate groundling gates next to the Swan pub into the piazza outside Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, and imagine yourself transported back in time to 16th century London. The audience drinking, fighting and braying at the actors on stage, the plays packed with murder, magic and comedy, where young boys dressed as women to play the female roles, and the grounds outside packed with market stalls and people spilling out of nearby taverns. The atmosphere today may be somewhat less rowdy, but seeing a play here is every bit as thrilling. The half-timbered auditorium is built in the round and open to the skies, but plays don't stop if it rains. In fact, the occasional rainstorm or crack of thunder can add to the drama. The perimeter has covered balconies, so you can pay more and watch the show in relative comfort. Alternatively, opt for a cheap ticket and stand in the pit or yard that surrounds the stage. If you do the latter, feel free to heckle, just like the Elizabethan audience did. This current building is a near replica of the original Globe Theatre that stood at a site nearby, the place that many of William Shakespeare's plays were first performed. Shakespeare's company, the Chamberlain's Men, started out at a theatre in Shoreditch built by the actor James Burbage, but following a dispute over the lease, they dismantled their playhouse and transported it timber by timber across the Thames here to Southwark. In 1599, the rebuilt Globe Theatre opened its doors to the public, and it thrived here for 14 years until a fire burned the wooden building to the ground. The modern Globe, with its entrance on Cardinal Cap Alley, opened in 1997, thanks to the vision of the American actor Sam Wanamaker. After a visit to London in 1949, Wanamaker dreamed of recreating the playhouse, and spent much of his life researching, fundraising and planning. Sadly, he died in 1993, 4 years before the project came to fruition. Take time to admire the handiwork that went into its reconstruction. It was a painstaking labour of love, using authentic 16th century materials and techniques, including green oak, white limewash and water reed thatch, all based on samples found during the excavation. In 2014, the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse was added to the site. It's modelled on the Blackfriars Theatre of 1608, where Shakespeare's company performed during the winter, and features a mythological ceiling painting, chandeliers and 2-tiered oak balconies. With seating for just 340, it's much more intimate than the Globe. So watching a play by candlelight there is a special treat. Plays at the Globe itself are staged only in summer. But beneath the building there's an exhibition space which is open all year round and includes sword fighting and costume demonstrations. Fascinating tours start every half an hour at the Bankside entrance. To discover where Shakespeare's original Globe Theatre stood, head a short distance further along the riverside and turn right between restaurants, taking a narrow lane called Bear Gardens, whose name recalls the bear baiting that went on here in Tudor times. Turn left at the end on Park Street and under a bridge to find a square behind some railings on the right. Information boards tell the story of the 1989 archaeological dig here, which unearthed the foundations of the first Globe, and today coloured cobbles in the courtyard mark the spot. There's even more about Elizabethan London on page 24 of your guidebook. Now continue along Park Street to Bank End, where you need to turn left and soon right into atmospheric Clink Street. The Clink Prison Museum. Bankside becomes more cramped here, with a palpable feeling of past centuries, and the macabre Clink Prison Museum occupies the site of one of London's very first lockups. Medieval Southwark was a lawless place, notorious for drinking dens and brothels, all licensed by the Bishops of Winchester, whose palace stood here on the south bank of the Thames. You'll see its foundations just a little way further along this street. The bishops decided a jail was needed to inter local miscreants, and in 1144 they opened the Clink, a place so infamous that its name became a byword for prisons across the land. The word clink is thought to derive either from the sound of the blacksmith's hammer bashing the iron cuffs for the legs and arms of prisoners, or from the Flemish word clink with a K, meaning latch, which could represent the lock on a jail door. The Clink Prison Museum tells its story of crime and punishment in histrionic style. Among the criminals incarcerated here were prostitutes, debtors, drunkards and heretics, but there were many big names from history too. They included Sir Thomas Wyatt, who led a rebellion against Queen Bloody Mary in 1554, and royalist supporters during the 17th century English Civil War. Descend to the small, dingy cells underground, where you'll find waxwork inmates and hear their recorded groans and shrieks. The replica torture equipment on display helps you imagine the punishments of medieval times. There's a whipping post, a torture chair, and a foot crusher. Panels describe a 12th century trial by ordeal, in which an accused person would be made to walk across red-hot irons. If they completed the journey without injury, they were declared innocent. Torture wasn't often carried out at the Clink, however. Important prisoners, heretics for example, would have been held here before being transported to the Tower of London or elsewhere for interrogation. Common miscreants were neglected, deprived of sleep, and often died of starvation or disease. Those with the money to bribe the warders could improve their lot. They received food, drink, beds and candles, and could have their leg irons removed. Poorer prisoners were given no food at all, and had to beg at the grates you'll see at street level. The end for the Clink finally came in 1780, when the Protestant Lord George Gordon broke in, released the prisoners, and burnt the building to the ground, in protest at the favours granted to Catholics by the Papists Act. Past the ruins of the Bishop of Winchester's palace, just past the Clink, and at the end of the street, you'll find a 1973 replica of the Golden Hind, the galleon in which the Elizabethan buccaneer Sir Francis Drake circumnavigated the globe. Turn right here towards Southwark Cathedral, your next stop. Southwark Cathedral. Southwark Cathedral is the oldest Gothic church building in London. It lies just across from the City of London, at the oldest crossing point on the River Thames. There's thought to have been a church on this site since at least AD 606, and it's likely that pagan worship took place here before that. This former priory church dates back to the 12th century, and it didn't become Southwark Cathedral until 1905. In the year 2000, a multi-million-pound programme added new buildings, which house a shop, a refectory and a glass-covered passageway that leads to the archaeology chamber. Well worth a look. Outside you'll find a new herb garden and the attractive Millennium Courtyard close to the riverside. The main entrance is on Montague Close. Step inside and take a quick look at the cathedral's stunning architecture. Admire the vaulted roof of the nave, designed by Sir Arthur Blomfield in the 1890s. Turn around and look to the back wall at ground level, where several 15th century roof bosses are displayed on either side of the font. In 1469, the church's roof collapsed, and these bosses come from the wooden roof that replaced it. See if you can find carvings of the devil swallowing Judas Iscariot, and the popular Christian motif of a pelican feeding its young with its own blood. Above the north aisle, the stained glass Kemp windows feature notable Southwark literary figures, including Samuel Johnson, John Bunyan and Geoffrey Chaucer, who wrote the Canterbury Tales. Can you spot Chaucer's pilgrims setting out for Canterbury from the Tabard Inn, which stood near here? Beneath these windows lies the eye-catching tomb of John Gower, a pioneering English poet and friend of Chaucer. Walk down the north aisle to the north transept. Here, on the back wall, is a memorial to the 17th century doctor Lionel Lockyer, who advocated the remarkable benefits of pills he sold at high prices. Sunbeams, he claimed, were among the key ingredients. Spend a moment reading the rather boastful inscription on his monument. After the north transept, you'll pass a chapel named after John Harvard, the first benefactor of Harvard University, who was baptized here in 1607. Beyond this comes the oldest part of the cathedral, the choir and retrochoir, which date from the 13th century. Within the choir, in the centre of the church, you'll find the magnificently carved Great Screen, which was installed in 1520. The statues adorning it are probably later additions, because during the Reformation, immediately after the screen was built, statues like this were forbidden. Walk behind the choir to the calm of the retrochoir, a beautiful example of early English architecture. It's peaceful now, but heresy trials were held here in the reign of Queen Mary I, during which several high-ranking clergymen were condemned to death. It was subsequently screened off, and pigs were kept here during Elizabeth I's reign. Conclude your tour by continuing through the south transept to the south aisle, where there's an alabaster memorial to William Shakespeare, who spent 14 years writing and acting at the nearby Globe Theatre. Look up to see characters from his plays cavorting in the stained glass window above. Beside Shakespeare's monument is a small memorial to Sam Wanamaker, the actor who championed the recreation of the Globe in 1997. Exit through the main entrance and turn left for Borough Market. Borough Market. If you've still got some energy left, explore Borough Market, stopping perhaps to grab a snack or a drink. There are stalls here every Wednesday to Saturday, but the market is closed on Sundays and much reduced in size on Mondays and Tuesdays. The market specialises in delectable ingredients from across Europe and beyond, and sampling the food is encouraged, but if you don't like crowds, avoid the area on Saturday mornings after 10 a.m. as it gets extremely busy. Traders were selling vegetables, grain, livestock and fish around nearby London Bridge as early as the 11th century, and they were relocated to this current site in the 13th century, making it London's oldest fruit and vegetable market. It was chartered by King Edward III in 1406, although back then it's unlikely to have sold ostrich burgers or Burmese curry powder. Borough Market's eclectic stalls reveal what Londoners like to eat today. As well as food from around the world, there's produce from all over Britain, English and Irish cheeses, Scottish beef, Welsh lamb, Devon cider and Suffolk oysters. The emphasis is on quality, and consequently it's not the cheapest place to shop, but you'll come away with exceptional produce, anything from fresh Parmesan cheese and Cornish scallops to grilled chorizo. The Monmouth Coffee Company serves an array of excellent coffees from around the world, which are roasted in nearby Bermondsey. Wander through the market to emerge on Borough High Street. On the way, glance up, and you'll see London's highest landmark, the Shard, rising up behind the market buildings. Before you reach that, however, there's one more stop on this journey, and it's rather fascinating. So now, cross Borough High Street to the corner of St Thomas Street. The old operating theatre. Walk a few yards along St Thomas Street, away from the junction with Borough High Street. On your left, you'll see a wooden doorway, which you could easily miss. Inside the porch, a narrow staircase spirals up to the old Operating Theatre Museum in the attic of St Thomas's Church. If you don't have time to visit today, it's well worth coming back to explore this macabre museum of surgical history. Ascending the staircase up to the garret feels like stepping back into the 19th century. At the top, you'll find a room packed full of surgical instruments and medical potions, plus one of Europe's oldest surviving operating theatres, dating back to 1822. It's an evocative setting for sure, and there's a good reason why the operating theatre was established here. The women's wards at the adjacent St Thomas's Hospital were built around one side of this tower. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, surgery was performed in the wards, causing distress to other patients. So a theatre was created in this church tower, within easy reach of the hospital below. St Thomas's is one of the oldest hospitals in Britain, and stood here from its foundation in the 12th century until it moved west in 1862. Nearly all its buildings were demolished to make way for the railway, but the operating theatre survived because of its sequestered location here. The space lay bricked up and forgotten until the 1950s, when it was rediscovered and subsequently restored. It's been fitted out just as it would have been in the early 19th century, before the discovery of either anaesthetics or antiseptics. The surgery table takes centre stage, and beside it a box of sawdust to soak up the blood of amputees. Patients were blindfolded, gagged and bound as student surgeons watched the amputations from the stalls. Howls of real torment once rang through the rafters here. In the days before the operating theatre, the church tower was used as a herb garret, where the hospital apothecary stored and cured herbs for his medicines. During the restoration of the museum, poppies were found in the rafters, which suggests that opium was given to the patients as pain relief. Today, the garret is stacked with musty animal skins and bizarre potions, and feels very like a witch's pantry. Now it's just a minute's walk down St Thomas Street to the Shard at London Bridge, your final stop. The Shard. The piercing glass edifice of the Shard, the tallest building in Western Europe, dominates the London skyline. This over 1,000-foot-high office block towers above London Bridge Station, so look up to admire it as you approach from the old operating theatre on St Thomas Street. Designed by Italian architect Renzo Piano, the skyscraper opened on the 5th of July 2012, with the aim of creating a vertical city in the sky. The crystalline structure comprises 8 interlocking facades that slope up toward a narrow point like futuristic shards of glass. There are 95 stories here, accommodating offices, restaurants, a 5-star hotel, exclusive apartments, and the country's highest observation gallery. For a fairly hefty fee, you can take a high-speed lift to the 68th floor, where there's a 3-story viewing platform called The View at the Shard. The building is so high you can't do the journey in one go. You'll need to switch to a second lift halfway up. Nonetheless, you'll arrive in no time, as the elevators travel at 19 feet per second. If you do make the ascent, be sure to use the bathroom while you're there, as it's a unique experience. The exterior wall in each cubicle is made of glass, so you can take a seat and enjoy the view. The regular programme of events on the viewing platform represents good value, given the cost of a ticket just to go up for the view. On Friday and Saturday nights there's a silent disco, where guests wear headphones and dance the night away in the open air. A sky-high yoga session is a more relaxing option. Or you can splash out on a meal at one of the 3 fine dining restaurants on levels 31 to 33. Despite its short history, there are already some remarkable stories attached to the Shard. During its construction, a fox was discovered on the 72nd floor. Named Romeo by staff, it's thought to have entered via a stairwell and survived on scraps of food left by construction workers. Then in July 2013, 6 Greenpeace protesters scaled the building to draw attention to drilling for oil in the Arctic. The all-female group climbed onto the roof of London Bridge Station and began their 16-hour ascent in the early morning. At the summit, they unfurled a blue Save the Arctic flag, only to be promptly arrested when they arrived back on terra firma. The Shard is the last stop on this walk, and you'll find the entrance right beside London Bridge Station, convenient for onward travel by tube or train to wherever you're heading next. The Museum Quarter. Welcome to this DK Eyewitness Travel Guide walk. For more information on the areas covered in this walk, turn to pages 202 to 217 in your guidebook. South Kensington's 3 marvellous museums, the Science Museum, the Natural History Museum and the Victoria and Albert, together represent one of the greatest gatherings of wonders in the world. There's only time to dip into them on this walk, but while there you can expect to come face to face with Rodin's sculptures, Stephenson's rocket and a very realistic Tyrannosaurus Rex. First, you need to get to the Museum Quarter, and the walk begins by sweeping through one of the most beautiful and bountiful of London's royal parks, Kensington Gardens, busy with attractions and curiosities. They include the Serpentine Gallery, the Peter Pan statue, and the Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fountain, all of which you'll visit today. Your route begins on the north side of Kensington Gardens, inside Marlborough Gate, which lies just across the road from Lancaster Gate Tube Station. If you can, plan to reach the Museum Quarter in time for lunch. All 3 institutions have good dining options. Or, if this is a Friday, start earlier and you may be lucky enough to catch a free concert by students from the Royal College of Music at St Mary Abbots Church, about 2/3 of the way along the route. The music starts at around 1 p.m. Kensington Gardens. Stretching across 265 green acres, Kensington Gardens is one of London's 8 royal parks, drawing millions of locals and visitors to stroll, cycle and picnic every year. Once part of Hyde Park, the area was land-grabbed by King Henry VIII from the monks of Westminster Abbey. The gardens you'll wander through today originated in 1689, when King William III and his wife Mary II bought Nottingham House in the quiet rural village of Kensington and renamed it Kensington Palace. 4 decades later, it was still a quiet rural retreat for the royal family. But when Queen Caroline died in 1737, her husband, King George II, was shocked to find she had spent a whopping £20,000, about 10 million in today's money, reshaping the gardens. Caroline dammed the Westbourne Stream to create the Long Water and the Serpentine, the 2 connected lakes that you'll walk beside today, and opened the grounds to respectably dressed people at weekends, when promenading the park's Broad Walk became the height of London fashion. Your first stop on this walk is right in front of you. The Italian Gardens, which were born of a royal romance, that of Queen Victoria and her beloved Prince Albert. Walk to the left side of their pump house pavilion and descend the steps to view the flamboyant fountains, looking over your left shoulder as you go to admire the Corinthian columns of Queen Anne's alcove. The alcove was designed in 1705 by Sir Christopher Wren, the master architect of St Paul's Cathedral, and it must be one of the world's grandest park benches. The Italian Gardens. Prince Albert was an avid gardener and created these ornamental water gardens in 1860 as a romantic gift to his queen. See if you can spot the royal couple at the far end near the Long Water Lake, suitably surmounted by crowns. Crafted in Portland stone and white Carrara marble, the garden's urns have 5 main designs: a swan's breast, a woman's head, a ram, dolphin and oval. But their greatest treasure is the Taza fountain, supported by mermen at the head of the Long Water. Albert's gardens were treated to a £500,000 restoration in 2011, thanks to funding from the American jewellery company Tiffany & Co. Master stonemasons spent a total of 1,200 hours carving new nymphs and swans, and the park's architects used old postcards to recreate its original planting scheme, with native water lilies and elegant spires of yellow flag iris. Look out, too, for the wooden walkways they added to help the park's ducks descend for a swim. Close to where you entered sits Edward Jenner, the country doctor from Gloucestershire who wiped out one of the world's deadliest diseases. Jenner's breakthrough came after he noticed that dairy workers who contracted a mild infection called cowpox were then protected against smallpox. In 1796, he injected 8-year-old James Phipps with a dose of cowpox, correctly believing it would immunize him against the much more virulent disease. Jenner's prediction that his new vaccine would lead to the eradication of smallpox worldwide finally came true almost 2 centuries later, in 1980. And his position here is especially poignant, since Queen Mary II, the first royal owner of Kensington Palace, died of smallpox in 1694. Less appropriate, perhaps, was the use of the Italian Gardens as a location in the 2004 comedy film Bridget Jones, The Edge of Reason, where Bridget's love rivals, played by Hugh Grant and Colin Firth, have a fight in the fountain here. Unlike Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, Bridget was famously unlucky in love. Leave the Italian Gardens on the opposite side and turn left along a path on the right-hand bank of the Long Water. In a few minutes, you'll reach the Peter Pan statue, which should be on your right, at a viewpoint overlooking the lake. Peter Pan statue. The writer J.M. Barrie secretly commissioned this statue of his greatest creation from the sculptor Sir George Frampton, and he had it erected here overnight on April the 30th, 1912, as a surprise gift to the children of London. It stands on the exact spot where in Barrie's 1902 story, The White Bird, the baby Peter flies out of his nursery window and flutters down beside the Long Water. Barrie's character was born after the author met the infant Peter Llewellyn Davies and his older brothers Jack and George on an outing with their nanny here in Kensington Gardens in 1897. The tales he told the boys and the pirate games they played went on to inspire his stories about the boy who never grew up, although Barrie's older brother, who died in an ice skating accident on the eve of his 14th birthday, was an inspiration too. In 1929, Barrie donated all the royalties from Peter Pan to Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital in nearby Bloomsbury, where a statue of Peter and Tinkerbell now stands beside the main entrance. Today, Peter's statue stands surrounded by the rabbits, mice and fairies of the park, and you can even hear him speak by swiping your smartphone on a panel in front of him. This is also a great spot to admire the rich bird life of the Long Water, whose herons, gulls and cormorants stake out the line of posts that stretch across the lake. The park's pair of mute swans hold court near here, nesting on their purpose-built island. And if you're really lucky, you might also see great crested grebes, unmistakable in their tufted caps, performing their balletic courtship ritual. As you continue along the lakeside path, listen for the screeching of the park's brilliant green flock of ring-necked parakeets. These tropical birds are more at home in Africa and Asia, but have been breeding in London's parks ever since the 1960s. They are known to sweep down for a snack from a park-goer's hand, and at dusk they make a tasty treat themselves for Kensington Gardens' marauding falcons and owls. When the view opens out again across the Long Water, pause to admire sculptor Henry Moore's monumental 20-foot-high arch rising beyond the lake. One of the 20th century's most influential artists, Moore was inspired to make this piece from a tiny fragment of bone, and he presented it to the nation in 1980, following an 80th birthday retrospective of his work at the Serpentine Gallery. Keep ahead along the lakeside path from here, and as you approach the road bridge where the Long Water becomes the Serpentine, you'll spot the gallery diagonally across to your right, peeping among the trees. It's the next stop on your walk. The Serpentine Gallery. If this gallery looks a little like a tea pavilion, it's because that's how it began life in 1934. Step inside, however, and surprises lurk. Today, this is an outstanding showcase for contemporary art, and admission is free. So why not take a moment to see today's shows? The 4 stark white spaces here have staged exhibitions by everyone from Andy Warhol to the Chapman brothers. And each summer, the gallery spills out across the surrounding lawns when it invites major architects such as Frank Gehry to design a pavilion to host Park Nights, a theatre, music and film performance programme. A satellite gallery opened in 2013 in a 200-year-old gunpowder store on the other side of the Serpentine Lake. That one focuses on young artists, and it's also free. Emerging from the gallery again, take the path left to cross the road which officially divides Kensington Gardens from Hyde Park. Bear diagonally left now across a sandy trackway and a car park to find the Diana Memorial Fountain. That sandy track, by the way, is Rotten Row, created by William III in 1690 as the Route du Roi, or King's Road, a carriage drive linking St James's Palace and his new stronghold at Kensington. William had Rotten Row illuminated with 300 oil lamps to deter highwaymen, making this one of the world's first artificially lit roads. It's still used by horses today, mainly the Queen's Household Cavalry from nearby Hyde Park Barracks, who like to exercise their steeds here. Diana Memorial Fountain. At the Diana Memorial Fountain, you'll find it's an altogether more contemplative water feature, a great ring of raised Cornish granite, where water flows down in 2 directions to meet in a calm pool at the base. It was designed by the American landscape artist Catherine Gustafson as a tribute to the people's princess, Princess Diana. The mother of Princes William and Harry died in a car accident in Paris in 1997. This fountain is said to symbolize Diana's inclusiveness and her turbulent private life. The fountain closed almost immediately after it opened in 2004 when 3 people slipped over and injured themselves while paddling in it. Still, it's safe enough nowadays, and if you fancy a short break from your walk, it's a right royal place to cool your feet. The fountain sits on the banks of the Serpentine, and you'll see Simon Gudgeon's sculpture of an elegant waterbird, Isis, preening itself on the nearby lakeside. Look to your right here, and you may see swimmers taking the plunge at the Serpentine Lido, where the hardy members of Britain's oldest swimming club have splashed and sunbathed for well over a century. Since 1864, they have broken the ice for a 100-yard race every Christmas morning, latterly known as the Peter Pan Cup. If you prefer your refreshment internal, there's a rather smart cafe bar beside the water there too. Now retrace your steps across Rotten Row and turn left along the road, approaching the park's Alexandra Gate. As you reach it, turn right, staying inside Kensington Gardens and sidestepping the lavish Colebrookdale gates. These are the only surviving relics of the Great Exhibition staged on this site in 1851, which you'll hear more about in a moment. Another minute or two's walk brings you to the Albert Memorial, an outlandish tribute to Queen Victoria's Prince Consort, erected here after his death aged just 42 in 1861. Albert Memorial. I can say with perfect absence of humbug that I would much rather not be made the prominent feature of such a monument." That was the retort of Prince Albert in 1853, when a statue was proposed in nearby Hyde Park to celebrate his wildly successful Great Exhibition. The exhibition had been staged just to the east of this spot 2 years previously in a cavernous 110-foot-high glass house that came to be known as the Crystal Palace. So we can only speculate what the prince would make of the Albert Memorial, an extravaganza in multicoloured marble, mosaic and gold leaf, which was commissioned by his grieving widow and unveiled in 1872, 11 years after his death. The monument was the work of the Gothic revival architect George Gilbert Scott, and portrays Albert clutching the catalogue of the exhibition that he helped to mastermind. The exhibition was a Victorian phenomenon, and 6 million visitors paid a shilling to marvel at its 100,000 exhibits, gathered from across the globe. They included the world's largest known diamond, the Koh-i-Noor, and a precursor of the modern fax machine, invented by one Frederick Bakewell. Just like the exhibition itself, Albert's Memorial trumpets the achievements of the expanding British Empire, with great marble beasts at the corners representing its dominions: a camel for Africa, a bison for the Americas, an elephant for Asia, and a bull for Europe. Encircling the statue's podium is the frieze of Parnassus, lining up no fewer than 169 figures of poets, painters, composers and architects, from Homer to Hogarth to Haydn. They were all carved in situ and life-size. See if you can find the only woman on the frieze. And also the head of George Gilbert Scott himself, peeking over the shoulder of his contemporary, Augustus Pugin. You can get a better look at the frieze if you sign up for one of the memorial's monthly guided tours. The monument cost £120,000. That's more than £10 million in today's money, though in fairness, Albert's exhibition had made even more. Its £186,000 profit was sufficient to finance the 3 mega museums you'll visit shortly on this walk: the Science Museum, the Victoria and Albert, and the Natural History Museum. Let's head that way now, stopping first just across the road outside the Royal Albert Hall. The Royal Albert Hall. Richard Wagner and Giuseppe Verdi, Albert Einstein and Ernest Shackleton, Frank Sinatra and Jay-Z, Nelson Mandela and the Dalai Lama. Does any concert hall in the world have a roster of greats to rival this one? Squatting like a big pink blancmange on the southern margin of Kensington Gardens, the Royal Albert Hall is the most instantly recognisable performance space in London, and it's every bit as iconic on the inside, as you'll discover if you sign up for one of its daily front-of-house tours. The hall opened in 1871, fulfilling Prince Albert's vision for a venue supporting the advancement of the arts and sciences. This was a new London cultural quarter, devoted to learning and the arts, and paid for with the profits from his great exhibition. Astonishingly, the Albert Hall is still partly supported by income from those original profits today. The hall is undoubtedly best known for the pomp and circumstance of its annual Proms season, a 6-week festival of classical music which has run every summer since 1895. The last night of the Proms, in particular, is a masterpiece of flag-waving patriotic fervour, climaxing with Rule Britannia and the national anthem. But these days, the Royal Albert Hall also stages rock, jazz, comedy, circus, and even tournament tennis. If you take the tour, you'll visit the elliptical Crimson Auditorium with its dome full of flying saucers, raised in the rafters here in 1969 to finally fix the hall's infamously tricky acoustics. You'll see the Queen's retiring rooms behind the Royal Box. A discreet switch here alerts the orchestra that Her Majesty is about to take her seat so they can strike up the national anthem. And tours also visit the balustraded smoking gallery up in the eaves, where super-cheap standing tickets can be had for many shows. For now, circle the hall to its left and visit the main lobby at door 12, where the pop artist Peter Blake has created a giant photo montage of 400 star performers who've appeared at the hall, which you can explore using touchscreen displays. See if you can find the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, who appeared on the same bill here in 1963, the only time that ever happened. Afterwards, descend the steps outside the entrance, passing another statue of Prince Albert, and turn left in front of the Royal College of Music, whose eminent former students have included the composers Gustav Holst and Benjamin Britten, not to mention Andrew Lloyd Webber and the guitarist John Williams. The college houses its own museum, free to explore, which numbers among its exhibits the world's oldest keyboard instrument, dating from about 1470. Reaching the end of Prince Consort Road, turn right into Exhibition Road, your gateway to three of London's most monumental museums. First stop here is the Science Museum, whose main entrance you'll find about 200 yards along on the right. It would take days to investigate every gallery of this museum, but admission is free, so why not pop into the first hall for a taster? The Science Museum. The museums are covered in more detail in your guide between pages 206 and 217. The main museum is free, but you can also check admission charges for special exhibitions and how to avoid the crowds on page 354. The Science Museum has been enthralling visitors since 1857, although back then it also included collections of art and design under the umbrella of the South Kensington Museum. And back then, you couldn't fly with the red arrows here, or fire up a pedal-powered TV set, or launch your own space probe. The 7 stories stretching out before you today are stacked with interactive wizardry using every trick of 21st century technology to bring their subject to life. And the museum is a wonder in itself, a sci-fi universe of neon-lit galleries that make just being here feel like an adventure. As well as 3D flight simulators and rooms full of hands-on experiments for children, you'll find enormous spaces devoted to human identity, climate change, and space exploration. The latter includes a full-size replica of the Eagle capsule that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin piloted onto the Moon in 1969. For now, though, you probably only have time for a wander into the Energy Hall behind the welcome desk, dedicated to the puffing, clanking history of steam power. Its exhibits include Old Bess, the oldest surviving steam engine, built by James Watt in 1777. Just beyond this room lies the Space Gallery, and if you charge straight through there, you'll find a vast hall crammed with machines cataloguing the history of invention from 1750 to the present day. It includes George Stephenson's pioneering locomotive, the rocket, Crick and Watson's model of the DNA molecule, and the very first Apple computer. Have a lightning look around, then tear yourself away and retreat onto Exhibition Road. Now continue to the right for another 100 yards or so, where you'll need to cross the street and enter the Victoria and Albert Museum by its side entrance. The Victoria and Albert Museum. Popularly known as the V&A, this dazzling storehouse of design and the decorative arts has a mind-boggling 145 galleries. They span 5 millennia, 5 continents, and almost 5 million objects. So for a first-time visitor, it can feel like wandering through a very strange dream. Turn a corner, and suddenly you're in a hall hung with enormous Raphael paintings. Climb a staircase, and you'll find a chamber encrusted with Fabergé gems, or lined with Roman columns, theatrical costumes, or Ottoman furniture. Queen Victoria herself laid the foundation stone for the museum's grand facade in May 1899, and it was her last official public engagement. The splendid silver trowel she used is still on display in room 123. Today, the V&A collection embraces everything from King Henry VIII's writing box to Kylie Minogue's dressing room. But fear not, its twin entrances make it easy for you to dip briefly into its treasures. The way you've entered from Exhibition Road leads directly into Room 21, which displays the most important gift ever granted to the museum by a living artist. 18 works by the French sculptor Auguste Rodin, which had been stranded in London after an exhibition in 1914 thanks to the onset of the First World War. Seek out Rodin's 6-foot nude, The Age of Bronze, so naturalistic that critics accused him of making plaster casts for it directly from the model. You have an optional detour now. First left through the doorway to the museum's Italianate courtyard, an elegant place to pause for coffee and a bite on a sunny day. If that doesn't appeal, head first right out of the Rodin room through Gallery 40, which is lined with highlights from the V&A's 100,000-strong fashion collection. The cabinets here display 250 years of cool clothing, and recent temporary shows have included Savage Beauty, a retrospective devoted to the designer Alexander McQueen. The latter drew a record-breaking 480,000 gallery-goers. For the first time ever, the museum opened all night long to accommodate them. At the far end of this space, pass straight through the next gallery into Room 48A, home to one of the museum's greatest treasures. The 7 mammoth canvases hanging here were painted 500 years ago by the Renaissance master Raphael, as templates for tapestries that would go on to adorn the Sistine Chapel in Rome. They depict the lives of St. Peter and St. Paul, and the project was mind-bogglingly expensive. Raphael charged 5 times the amount that Michelangelo was paid for the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Leave this gallery where you entered it, then turn right through passages lined with Southeast Asian artifacts to emerge in the museum's grand lobby. Beyond the welcome desk with its blown glass chandelier by the American artist Dale Chihuly, see if you can spot Jan Bologna's sinuous statue of Samson slaying a Philistine, which wowed London when it arrived from Spain in 1623. The statue came as a gift to King Charles I, who had hoped to return with the hand of the King of Spain's daughter instead. Now it's time to depart the museum through its main entrance, stepping out into Cromwell Road. If you turn left here, you'll soon reach Brompton Oratory, arguably London's most sumptuous Catholic church. Or if you'd prefer, you can keep going for 10 minutes more to explore Harrods department store. We're going to turn right outside the V&A back to Exhibition Road. Cross it and take the ramp on the opposite corner down to meet the lawns of the Natural History Museum. The Natural History Museum. In front of you towers the third of South Kensington's monumental museums, a building filled with 80 million specimens, which together tell the story of life on Earth. Stand on the East Lawn and admire the idiosyncratic building designed by Alfred Waterhouse in 1881, with its Romanesque influences and scores of mighty statues of plants and animals. The East Wing, directly in front of you here, portrays extinct species. The West Wing, further along, is guarded by living ones. If you're visiting in summer, there's likely to be a marquee on the lawn before you, home to the museum's ever-popular pop-up butterfly house. And at Christmas, this same area hosts a festive ice rink. Ahead of you, the queue up the visitor ramp to the entrance can often be long, but this museum is also free to enter, so if you've time to linger, at least have a roam around the cathedral-like lobby, the Hintzer Hall. It's dominated by its gobsmacking centrepiece, an 82-foot-long blue whale skeleton, the largest creature ever to inhabit our planet. In 2017, this skeleton replaced Dippy, the museum's much-loved full-size replica of a Diplodocus skeleton. Dippy had welcomed wide-eyed visitors since 1979, and there was so much public outcry at the news of the dinosaur's removal that plans are afoot for Dippy to tour around museums across Britain from 2018 until 2020. Under the vaulted arches on each side of the blue whale skeleton, you'll find some of the museum's other standout exhibits, including a woolly mammoth skull and a giant mower 30 feet tall and long since extinct. Check out the hall's magnificent decoration too, including playful terracotta monkeys scrambling up the columns. Presiding over all this, atop the steps at the far end, sits the great Victorian naturalist Charles Darwin, enthroned here since 2009, when he was shifted to replace a statue of the museum's first director, Sir Richard Owen. Owen was the paleontologist who came up with the term dinosaur, but he challenged Darwin's theories on evolution, and the two naturalists were great enemies. In 1871, Darwin commented on Owen, "I used to be ashamed of hating him so much, but now I will carefully cherish my hatred and contempt to the last days of my life." Exploring the other galleries involves at least a half-day expedition, so you'll want to come back to investigate the popular Dinosaur Hall, complete with animatronic Tyrannosaurus rex, and the fossil collection, which includes the Archaeopteryx that proved the missing link between dinosaurs and birds. Other highlights include a juddering simulator that recreates the 1995 Kobe earthquake, and the Darwin Centre, a stunning white cocoon 8 stories tall, where you're invited to use touchscreen technology to explore the work of the museum's 200 scientists. Retrace your steps, leaving the central hall where you came in, and keep straight ahead to emerge on Cromwell Road. The next stage of our walk is relatively uneventful, but nonetheless takes in one of London's loveliest residential neighbourhoods, a maze of stuccoed streets lined with immaculate Georgian houses. Turn right outside the museum along Cromwell Road, and then first right up Queensgate. Keep going until you reach Queensgate Terrace. Turn left here to reach Gloucester Road, where, on the corner, you'll spot a branch of the Queen's grocer, Partridge's. Cross directly into Victoria Grove, which leads into St Albans Grove. Finally, turn right on Kensington Court Place, a former home of the poet T.S. Eliot at No. 3 Kensington Court Gardens, and left along Thackeray Street into Kensington Square. Kensington Square. This garden square was laid out way back in 1685, when Kensington was still a village a full mile from the edge of London, and it remains a surprising oasis of serenity today, tucked just behind the hubbub of Kensington High Street. The square even has a convent, which you can usually steal a look into, and it's full of historic houses and famous connections too, as you'll discover as you work your way around to the opposite corner. A building on the left of Thackeray Street, which you've just walked along, has a blue plaque remembering Joan Sims, the comic actress best known for starring in 24 films in the bawdy Carry On series. William Makepeace Thackeray, the author of Vanity Fair, a novel satirising 19th century British life, lived not on Thackeray Street itself, but on nearby Young Street, first right off the square. You'll find his house was at number 16, just before the Northcliffe Building, the headquarters of one of Britain's oldest established newspapers, the Daily Mail. The Mail was first published in 1896, and by 1902 it had become the world's first daily paper to sell 1 million copies a day. It remains the UK's second biggest seller today, and the only newspaper with more women readers than men, though it has known its share of controversy, including a period when its owner, Lord Rothermere, was a friend of Hitler and Mussolini. In 1934, he penned an article under the headline, "Hurrah for the Black Shirts." Back on Kensington Square, aim clockwise to find the home of the Victorian composer Hubert Parry at number 17. Parry is best known for setting music to William Blake's poem Jerusalem, the song often championed these days as an English national anthem. Right next door lived the philosopher and Liberal MP John Stuart Mill, a hero to free thinkers, who argued that an individual's drive for self-betterment is the sole source of true freedom. At 33 lived the actress and wit Mrs. Patrick Campbell, who became a star on Broadway and in 1914 scored a smash hit as the original Eliza Doolittle in George Bernard Shaw's play Pygmalion, despite being 49 years old when she first starred in the role. And at number 41 stands the home of the painter and stained glass maker Edward Burne-Jones, a leading light in the pre-Raphaelite movement. Depart Kensington Square via Derry Street in the far corner, and you'll very soon pass the anonymous-looking entrance to the Kensington Roof Gardens. Look for a sign for Babylon Restaurant on the left. Owned by Sir Richard Branson, the Virgin tycoon, the Roof Gardens are one of London's best-kept secrets. A manicured display of 500 plant species, filling an acre and a half of rooftop fully 100 feet above the Capitol. The gardens were originally laid out by the landscape architect Trevor Hancock in 1938, who even imported rock from Pennsylvania for his alpine planting. In the early days, the public were charged £1 to visit them, and the visitor fees raised more than £120,000 for local charities. Today, you're able to take the lift up to the roof gardens for free and meet the garden's surreal residents, its 4 live flamingos. But note that they're often closed for private functions. Up ahead, Derry Street opens out onto busy Kensington High Street. Cross to the right and enter the porch of St Mary Abbots Church. St Mary Abbots Church. Crane your neck and admire the spire of this pretty church. It holds the distinction of being the loftiest in all London at 278 feet. St Mary Abbots' current incarnation dates from 1872 and was the work of the architect Sir George Gilbert Scott, whom we met earlier as the mastermind of the Albert Memorial. But there's been a church on this site since 1262, and history records an all-star cast of parishioners, including the scientist Sir Isaac Newton, the anti-slavery campaigner William Wilberforce, and Peter Rabbit's friend Beatrix Potter, who got married here in 1913. That's not all. Church wardens report that rock music royalty has also frequented St Mary Abbots. Mick Jagger had his children baptised here, and Madonna has been spotted in the pews. If this happens to be a Friday, and you've timed things right, you might be treated to a free concert performed by students from the Royal College of Music, which you passed earlier on the walk. They normally begin at around 1 p.m. Either way, enter the church by heading left along its atmospheric cloister. Once inside, head right to find the Resurrection Chapel, with its rough wooden cross recovered from the First World War battlefield at Oppy Wood in France, where many from the Kensington Battalion of the Royal Fusiliers lost their lives in 1917. Also here stands a stone monument of a sorrowful angel, sculpted by Queen Victoria's daughter, Princess Louise, in memory of her late brothers, Alfred and Leopold. And very nearby, you'll spy a little door, tucked discreetly into the corner of the south transept. This is the secretive royal door, no doubt used by Princess Diana when she used to steal into St Mary Abbots to worship during her time at Kensington Palace. Exit the church where you came in, but this time turn right, emerging in the churchyard for a look at the Blue Coat Primary School, which stands beside it. The first St Mary Abbots Charity School was endowed as early as 1645, when a certain Roger Pimble left money for the maintenance of a free school for poor men's children here. The 300-year-old figures of a schoolboy and schoolgirl still add a festive touch to the frontage today. The boy holds a scroll which reads, "I was naked and ye clothed me." A narrow passageway to the right of you now leads behind the church and out through a gate onto Kensington Church Walk, a mine of pricey antique emporiums. Head to the top of the road and turn right. Then cross Kensington Church Street into York House Place, which leads you out between very grand embassy buildings into Kensington Gardens again. Incidentally, it's said that the road you've just crossed, Kensington Palace Green, is the most expensive address in London. In 2005, the steel magnate Lakshmi Mittal is said to have paid £70 million for a property there, though in fairness, the address did straddle numbers 18 to 19. Keep ahead into the park, and you'll soon find yourself right in front of the golden gates of Kensington Palace on your left. Kensington Palace. Kensington Palace first became a royal headquarters in 1689, when King William of Orange, the statue that greets you just beyond these gates, asked the architect Christopher Wren to turn a Jacobean manor house into a residence fit for a king. He wanted it done as cheaply and quickly as possible, mind you, which is why the palace is built in brick rather than stone. King William chose Kensington over Whitehall because the air was cleaner, so it didn't aggravate his asthma, and Wren's extension is largely what survives today. On June the 20th, 1837, the 18-year-old Princess Victoria woke in her bed here to discover that she'd become queen. As you round the palace gates to your right, you'll see her enthroned in her coronation robes in a marble statue sculpted 56 years later by her own daughter, Princess Louise. Note that Victoria is wearing her wedding ring on her right hand in the continental style, reflecting her husband's German roots. The young Victoria loved Kensington Palace. She kept a dog called Dash here, which she liked to dress up in a scarlet jacket and blue trousers. She also took to riding her donkey through the gardens. As Queen, she later became the first British monarch to base herself at Buckingham Palace. But Kensington has continued to be a favourite home for the royal family. By the 1930s, so many minor royals were quartered in its princesses' court that King Edward VIII called it an ant heap. Bomb damage in the Second World War badly scarred the state apartments, but they were restored in time for the current Queen's younger sister, Princess Margaret, to hold court here in the swinging 60s. Margaret was famous for her raucous society parties and hosted the likes of Peter Sellers, Mary Quant and Rudolf Nureyev, playing them show tunes on her grand piano. The palace is best known, however, as the home of Diana, Princess of Wales, who lived in its northwest apartments from her marriage to the Prince of Wales in 1981 until her death in 1997. And it was outside these gates that throngs of people came to lay an extraordinary carpet of flowers in memory of the Queen of Hearts. It's said that Diana once got locked out of the palace and so went to the tourists' entrance, where she helped to sell tickets to visitors while waiting for a spare key. Since 2013, Diana's son William and his wife Catherine, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, have made Kensington Palace their family home, adding children George and Charlotte to the family. In recent years, a £12 million refurbishment has opened up much of the palace, allowing paying visitors better access to its 18th century state rooms. If you opt to go in, look out especially for the King's Staircase, painted with a life-size mural of King George I's court. See if you can spot Peter the Wild, a 12-year-old boy who was discovered by King George living feral near Hamelin in Germany in 1725. Peter walked on all fours and fed on forest plants, but he was adopted by King George, dressed in finery, and brought to London to amuse the court. In William Kent's painting, he is shown still clutching an acorn. The palace visit also includes highlights of the royal ceremonial dress collection, including a gorgeous array of the late Princess of Wales's gowns, while other exhibitions uncover the public and private lives of Kensington's assorted queens and princesses, Mary II, Victoria, Margaret, and of course Diana. Circle the palace to the right, detouring briefly across the formal garden to admire Queen Victoria's statue and the long vista across the round pond, created in 1728 and occasionally frozen solid enough for winter skating. Then cross back to the Palace Café and wind among the hornbeam hedges of the so-called Wiggly Walk. You'll emerge opposite the magnificent orangery, commissioned by Queen Anne to protect her citrus trees in 1704, and now a very upmarket place to toast your walk with a champagne afternoon tea. When you're done, turn left out of the orangery into Kensington Gardens, and immediately left again along the Broad Walk to reach the Diana Memorial Playground. It's the final stop on your walk. Diana Memorial Playground. A playground has been delighting children in this corner of Kensington Gardens for over a century, The author J.M. Barrie donated a set of swings as far back as 1912, so it was only natural to theme this new play space, opened in Millennium Year as a tribute to Princess Diana, on the adventures of Peter Pan. Every year, 1 million people now swing, slide and seesaw here, and adults can't enter unless accompanied by a child under 12. Through the railings, you might glimpse a huge pirate galleon, a miniature beach and a teepee encampment, while to the left of the entrance is a more ancient attraction, the Elfin Oak. Originally from Richmond Park, this 900-year-old tree stump is alive with fairy folk, carved by the illustrator Ivor Innes in the 1920s. The oak appears inside the cover of a Pink Floyd album, and in 1996 the great comedian Spike Milligan raised funds to restore it, carrying out much of the work himself on Saturday mornings. See if you can find a friendly witch with her potions health, wealth and happiness. Your walk is now complete. Continue to Black Lion Gate, where Queensway Tube Station waits to whisk you away. Theatreland and Covent Garden. Welcome to this DK Eyewitness Travel Guide walk. For more information about the areas in this walk, see pages 340 to 342 in your guide, which include a list of London theatres and a handy map. Covent Garden is London's oldest public square and remains an all-action playground for young and old, embracing everything from high art at the Royal Opera House to the low comedy of its clowns on the street corners. It forms the centrepiece of this walk through the Theatreland district. But your first act is a dodge through Soho, a cosmopolitan area long known as the city's nightclub capital, packed with pop music history and rapidly gentrifying since its days as a sleazy den of strip clubs in the 1970s and 80s. Later on, the route will take you into London's most colourful courtyard, its oldest working playhouse, and its quirkiest church, finishing with a grand finale in the city's most fabulous Georgian building, right beside the Thames. If you're arriving by underground to begin this walk, leave Tottenham Court Road Tube Station by exit number 1 and turn left along Oxford Street, London's great canyon of consumerism. Take the first left turn into Soho Street, which leads onto Soho Square, the first stop on your trail. Soho Square. Today it throngs with shoppers and office workers, especially around the lunchtime picnic hour. But in Restoration times, Soho Square was the heartbeat of fashionable London. Laid out in 1681, it was originally known as King's Square, in honour of King Charles II, whose statue you'll find posing rather forlornly among the foot traffic in its grassy gardens. The name Soho is thought to derive from a hunting cry in the days when this area was all fields, and Charles's illegitimate son, the Duke of Monmouth, who lived on the south side of the square, was wont to bellow, "Soho!" as he charged into battle. Only a couple of Soho Square's smart 17th century residences survive intact today, numbers 10 and 15, near where you entered the square. There are plenty of buildings worth investigating, though. At numbers 8 and 9, you'll find the rather Gothic-looking French Protestant church, a throwback to the period 300 years ago when nearly half of Soho's populace were immigrant Huguenots. Look for the carved tympanum above the door, thanking King Edward VI for granting them asylum in 1550. 2 of the arriving refugees are squashed into the ship's hold and look absolutely terrified. Work your way clockwise around the square from here and check out number 14, former home of the Jamaican nurse Mary Seacole, who treated the troops with her herbal remedies during the Crimean War. In recent years, Seacole has stepped out of the shadows of her contemporary, Florence Nightingale. She was voted the greatest black Briton ever in a 2004 poll. Continue past the Catholic St. Patrick's Church, whose catacombs extend beneath your feet under the square, to reach the corner of Greek Street, where the House of St. Barnabas boasts the best-preserved 18th-century interiors in the neighbourhood. Since 1862, a charity for the homeless has been headquartered here, and you can still pop a donation into its historic penny chute just by the railings today. The novelist Charles Dickens, an ardent champion of the poor, was often a visitor, and the building became home to his heroine Lucy Manette in A Tale of Two Cities. Cut diagonally across the square from Greek Street to exit via Carlisle Street, on the western side. On the way, look out for the bench remembering the singer Kirsty MacColl, given by fans after her death in 2000. The square also features table tennis tables, and the lawns are anchored by a Tudor-style gardener's hut in the middle, which looks like something out of Hansel and Gretel. Now turn left almost immediately along Dean Street, and restart the recording when you reach number 28, now occupied by Quo Vadis restaurant. Karl Marx's house. Cross the road from the restaurant and look up at number 28. You'll spot a blue plaque dedicated to Karl Marx, who spent the early 1850s living on the top floor here. One visitor called it one of the worst quarters of London, and such was the squalor that Marx and his wife Jenny saw 3 of their 5 children die in infancy. Undaunted, Marx would walk each day to the British Library to research his masterpiece of communist philosophy, Das Kapital. 50 years earlier than that, Britain's #1 naval hero, Horatio Nelson, lodged here in Dean Street on the night before he embarked for Trafalgar. They say the Admiral spent the evening perfecting his battle strategy, which included a cunning plan to paint his warships in yellow and black checks so they wouldn't be hit by friendly fire. He also visited an undertaker to choose his coffin in case he didn't make it through the battle. Keep going and take the next turning on the left, Bateman Street, which will bring you to the historic Dog and Duck pub, as good a place as any to pause for refreshment and soak up more of the history of this intriguing slice of London. The Dog and Duck. There's been a tavern on this site since at least 1734, and today's Dog and Duck is a tremendous example of a late Victorian Soho pub, its interior glittering with mirrors, mosaics and marquetry. If you can get a table in the snug space at the back, you'll see mementos of the writer George Orwell, who was once a regular here. As you've gathered already, the surrounding streets of Soho are crammed with restaurants, bars and clubs. This has been the heart of London nightlife ever since the singer Teresa Cornelis arrived penniless in 1759 and set about captivating high society. Cornelis hosted masked balls and revels at her salons in Soho Square, attracting princes, politicians and artists. Johann Christian Bach organised concerts for her, Chippendale made her chinoiserie, and the legendary lover Casanova shared her bed. Soho's heyday, however, began in the 1930s, when Laura Henderson, borrowing from the famous Folies Bergère in Paris, scandalised London with her nude showgirls at the Windmill Theatre. Government censors decreed that so long as the girls didn't move, the shows could go ahead. In later years, the theatre helped to launch the career of lots of great comedians, including Tony Hancock, Peter Sellers and Tommy Cooper. Then, in the late 1950s, the Two Eyes Coffee Bar on Old Compton Street, which you'll cross shortly, staged shows by the teenage singers Tommy Steele and Cliff Richard, giving it a strong claim to be the birthplace of British rock and roll. A plaque marks the spot at number 59 today. Soon after that, Carnaby Street, just to the west of here, became the centre of so-called swinging London, and rock legends including David Bowie, The Who and Led Zeppelin lit up the Marquee Club on Wardour Street. Meanwhile, a young Mark Bolan was hanging out in Soho's lively coffee bars between working on his mother's market stall in nearby Berwick Street. Berwick Street still has a fruit and vegetable market today. One bit of Soho's musical heritage that does survive is Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club, which has been at 47 Frith Street since 1959. It's where the legendary guitarist Jimi Hendrix made his last public appearance in 1970, days before he choked to death at a Notting Hill hotel. We're heading to Ronnie Scott's now. Cross Bateman Street and aim along Frith Street, pausing at number 54 to peruse a plaque remembering Dr. John Snow. You'll need to cross the road to see it. Dr. John Snow was a pioneer of anaesthetics, and in 1854 he made a major breakthrough in the epidemiology of cholera when he spotted a link between a deadly epidemic in Soho with an infected water pump in Broadwick Street. The story goes that after the good doctor broke off the pump's handle, the disease abated, helping to prove that cholera was waterborne, not airborne. In those days, the River Thames was little better than an open sewer, but 4 years later, London's chief engineer, Joseph Bazalgette, began work on the 82 miles of brick tunnels that laid the foundation for the city's first proper sewerage system. As you approach Ronnie Scott's Club at number 47 Frith Street, look across the road to number 20, where in 1764 the 8-year-old musical prodigy Wolfgang Mozart lodged with his father on a grand tour of London. Already renowned, the young Mozart gave daily public recitals and published his Opus 3 from this address. Just 2 doors along at number 22, another plaque celebrates the invention of television by the Scottish engineer John Logie Baird in 1925. Experimenting with transmitting moving images in his attic here, the excited Baird ran downstairs and paid an office junior called William Tainton to come and be the first person ever to appear on TV. Keep going across Old Compton Street and turn left on Romilly Street, emerging beside the Palace Theatre on Cambridge Circus. The Palace Theatre. The great terracotta edifice of the Palace Theatre is one of the finest in London's West End. It was commissioned in 1891 by Richard D'Oyly Carte, famous as the impresario behind the light opera kings Gilbert and Sullivan. Originally intended for staging English operas, within a year it had been rebranded the Palace Theatre of Varieties. It then thrived for decades as a home of music hall and vaudeville. In 1922, the Marx Brothers performed the funniest sketches from their Broadway shows here. The Palace also trailblazed a new invention called cinema. It was screening newsreel films as early as 1897. These days, the theatre is known for blockbuster musicals. The Sound of Music ran for 2,385 performances starting in 1961. And a decade later, Andrew Lloyd Webber had his first smash hit here, Jesus Christ Superstar, which ran continuously until 1980. That's 3,358 shows. Les Miserables eclipsed even that record, filling the auditorium for 19 years before transferring to the Queen's Theatre just along Shaftesbury Avenue, where it's still going. In 2006, it overtook Cats as the longest-running musical of all time. Now cross Charing Cross Road in front of the Palace and head directly into Shaftesbury Avenue opposite. On the next corner, you'll find the Odeon Covent Garden, now a cinema, but notable for the jolly frieze sculpted by Gilbert Bayes in 1931, when this building opened as the Saville Theatre. The frieze depicts theatre through the ages. See if you can spot Mr. Punch and Puck and Bottom from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. In the 1960s, the Saville was famed as a cradle of rock and roll. In 1965, police had to be called when fans stormed the stage during a Chuck Berry gig, and 2 years later, the Beatles filmed a promo for their song Hello Goodbye here, a forerunner of the modern pop video. Cross over and take the next right, Mercer Street, up to 7 Dials. 7 Dials. In 1836, Charles Dickens wrote, "The stranger who finds himself in the Dials for the first time, at the entrance of 7 obscure passages, uncertain which to take, will see enough around him to keep his curiosity awake for no inconsiderable time." That's still true today, thanks to the knot of trendy boutiques and independent food stores that congregate on all sides of the 7 Dials pillar, with its 6 rather festive blue sundials. The 7th dial, by the way, is said to be the pillar itself. And a graph on the wall of a cafe nearby will help you convert solar time to Greenwich Mean Time. It was donated by the musician Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics, who once had a studio here. The streets of 7 Dials were originally laid out in 1694 by Thomas Neal, the Master of the Royal Mint, in a bid to cash in on the roaring success of nearby Covent Garden, which we'll visit shortly. But instead of attracting the moneyed classes, it became a notorious slum, penned in by public houses. And in 1773 the central monolith was pulled down to deter undesirables from congregating here. The modern replica you're looking at today arrived in 1989. It was unveiled amid a cloud of orange balloons by Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands to mark the 300th anniversary of the Glorious Revolution, when William III became Britain's first Dutch king. It's well worth a detour now, taking the first left along Monmouth Street, where about 100 yards along on the right you can duck into Neal's Yard, London's most colourful little courtyard. The brightly painted health food stores and cafes here are an oasis of alternative values in this very commercial corner of London, and it's a jaunty place to have coffee on the cobbles. Look out for the Yard's magic mirror and the winding gear high up among the window boxes, a legacy of the Victorian warehouses which once stood here. Exit Neal's Yard at the far end and turn right along Short's Gardens back to Seven Dials. Then take the third turn on the left, Monmouth Street, which soon becomes Upper St Martin's Lane and emerges on Longacre. En route, on the corner of West Street, you'll pass the HQ of the Actors' Union Equity, behind which, appropriately enough, stands St Martin's Theatre, which has been home to Agatha Christie's play The Mousetrap since 1974. When it opened in 1952, Christie predicted The Mousetrap would last no more than 8 months. But in 2012, Patrick Stewart and Julie Walters starred in a special 25,000th performance, and it's still going. By far the longest-running play in modern theatrical history. Cross Longacre and take the next left along Garrick Street. Opposite Floral Street, you'll pass the grand glass doors of the Garrick Club, a gentlemen's club for actors and men of letters that opened in 1831. Its roll of members has included everyone from Charles Dickens and H.G. Wells to Sir Laurence Olivier and Stephen Fry, and all newcomers are elected by secret ballot, the original committee having decreed that it would be better that 10 unobjectionable men should be excluded than one terrible bore should be admitted. Those who have been blackballed include the first actor ever to be knighted, Sir Henry Irving, and the news journalist Jeremy Paxman, and women are still barred from the list altogether. Continue along Garrick Street to the junction with the cobbled Rose Street, where you'll see the Lamb and Flag pub along to the left. The Lamb and Flag. Licensed since at least 1772, this is thought to be the oldest inn in Covent Garden, and still looks the part today, with its tall sash windows and flickering candlelight. A sign near the entrance records the day in 1679 when the poet John Dryden was nearly done to death in the alley here by assassins, hired either by the Earl of Rochester or King Charles II, depending on which version of history you believe. Dryden had written some scurrilous verses about one of the king's many mistresses, though despite his offering a £50 reward, the attackers were never identified. The Lamb and Flag's building is even older than that, parts of it dating, like Rose Street, to 1623. It was once known as the Bucket of Blood, having become a favourite location for bare-knuckle prize fighting. If you stop for a drink, note the more recent plaques along the bar, celebrating favourite customers, including the Gentleman Plumber, Ferret, and Rolex Reg. Once refreshed, return to Garrick Street and continue left into Bedford Street, looking out for the gated entrance to the garden of St Paul's Church on the left. St Paul's Church. The great neoclassical architect Inigo Jones designed St Paul's for the 4th Earl of Bedford in 1631 in the style of a Roman temple. It was the centrepiece of his elegant new Covent Garden piazza, which you'll be exploring in a moment. The church entrance is from the garden at this western end, thanks to a 5-year wrangle with the Bishop of London, who insisted that the altar must be to the east so that worshippers faced Jerusalem. That's why Jones's stately frontage on the Covent Garden side has no doorway. Today, the church's portico makes a perfect proscenium arch for Covent Garden's street acrobats and clowns, just like a theatre, which is fitting, since St Paul's has long been known as the Actors' Church. Since 2007, it's even had its own professional company, Iris Theatre. Venture into the airy interior, where you can hunt for inscriptions honouring Charlie Chaplin, Vivian Leigh, Noel Coward, and many more. The painter J.M.W. Turner was baptised here. The singer Gwen Stefani got married here, and among the residents of the burial ground are Margaret Porteous, said to have been the first victim of the Great Plague of 1665, which went on to claim the lives of 1 in every 5 Londoners. Other notable memorials honour the original Frankenstein's monster, Boris Karloff, and Percy Press, the king of Punch and Judy, whose stone depicts the puppet pair. And take a look too at the church's vintage model theatre, once shown off in village halls to raise money for a London hostel where actors could lodge their children while they went on tour. When you're done, circle the church and emerge on Covent Garden's piazza, the next stopping point on your route. Covent Garden. From the historic Apple Market to the cutting-edge Apple Store, today's Covent Garden is the vibrant core of London shopping and street life. So it's remarkable to consider that it was almost bulldozed in the 1970s. Local people fought successfully to save it. Before you stretches the first formal square laid out in London, designed along classical lines by Inigo Jones in the early 1630s. Jones's brief was to create houses and buildings fit for the habitations of gentlemen and men of ability, and he based his arcaded layout on a Palladian piazza he had seen in Livorno in Italy. These days, Covent Garden is full of fun and festivity, and it's worth at least an hour of mazy exploring. You've entered beside its main busking space, where a motley cast of clowns and entertainers perform acrobatics, fire-eating and unicycling, sometimes all at once. There's a 350-year-old tradition of alfresco entertainment outside St Paul's. In May 1662, the great London diarist Samuel Pepys watched what he called an Italian puppet play under this portico. It was the first recorded performance of Punch and Judy, and it's still commemorated by an annual puppet festival and parade here every May. Nowadays, street performers have to audition to win a place on the roster to appear in the square, and like singers on a TV talent show, they only get 3 minutes to impress. Do put a coin in the hat if you enjoy their show. Move on next into the Apple Market, directly in front of you. Roofed with glass and iron in 1833, this now houses craft stalls, but it was once London's wholesale produce market. Under the first archway to the left, you'll find a board detailing the original market rules from 1829, including one prohibiting costermongers from shaking their nuts or using indecent language, penalty 10 shillings. The old fruit and vegetable traders only moved out as recently as 1974. Turn to the right through the arcade into the South Hall, where opera singers often belt out arias in the sunken courtyard, and where, hidden away up a staircase, you'll find Benjamin Pollock's Toy Shop, a jewel box of a place which has been selling exquisite paper theatres since 1880. Charles Dickens and Robert Louis Stevenson are among those who loved to play with paper playhouses as children. After Pollock died in 1937, the actor Ralph Richardson spearheaded a revival of the craft of theatre-making, even recruiting J.B. Priestley to pen a special play about highwaymen for the paper actors. Emerging on the south side of the piazza, you'll see Jubilee Market, its souk-like passageways lined with T-shirt and trinket stands. Aim to the left of this, heading for the entrance to the London Transport Museum. It's your next stop. Covent Garden is one of the most popular places in London. You can learn more about it in your guide, starting at page 114. London Transport Museum. Don't be put off by the subject matter. This is one of the most hooting-tooting museums in London. It crams 20 vintage buses, trams and trains into a steel and glass cavern once occupied by the Covent Garden Flower Market. and if you pay a visit, you'll get to climb aboard lots of them to take a look. The exhibition starts on level 2, up in the rafters, with a model sedan chair and the city's earliest horse-drawn omnibus, which costs sixpence to ride. Visitors can jump in and sit beside a top-hatted gent as he reels off the rules of the road, 1829 style. Elsewhere there are sound clips of bus conductors and crossing sweepers, whose job was to clear the 1,000 tons of horse dung deposited on the streets of Victorian London every day. Downstairs, level 1 is filled to bursting with the first underground steam train from the 1860s, while vintage posters recall how the tube age sent the city sprawling out into the suburbs. On a nearby balcony is a push-button interactive zone for children, while the ground floor has a dozen more vehicles to explore, plus sit-in simulators where you can manoeuvre the so-called dead man's handle that's used to drive a modern-day tube train. Elsewhere, you can find out how many tram and train windows were damaged by World War II bombs, and how many items forgetful passengers leave behind on London buses every year. Collect your things and exit through the rather cool gift shop, whose poster collection features work by such notable 1930s artists as Paul Nash and Graham Sutherland. Your next step is across the eastern side of the square to turn right into Russell Street. As you go, look out for a bakery at number 8, the house where in 1763 the lexicographer and wit Samuel Johnson first encountered his friend and biographer James Boswell. Boswell had heard that Johnson didn't much like the Scots, and told him, "I do indeed come from Scotland, but I cannot help it." To which Johnson retorted, "That, sir, I find, is what a great many of your countrymen cannot help." Turn next left off Russell Street to reach the mighty porch of the Royal Opera House. Royal Opera House. Now home to both the Royal Opera and the Royal Ballet Companies, Covent Garden's Showpiece Theatre began life as the Theatre Royal in 1732. For the next 100 years, it vied with the Drury Lane Theatre just down the road as one of only 2 playhouses with a King's patent to present drama in London. The theatre was built for the actor-manager John Rich, who funded it with takings from a recent smash-hit work by John Gay, The Beggar's Opera. Ironically, Gay's show had satirised formal Italian opera, and it wowed London, running for a then record 62 consecutive nights. The great George Frederick Handel arrived in Covent Garden with John Rich as his musical director, and gave his Messiah its UK premiere at this theatre in 1743, along with many of his operas and oratorios. Handel also introduced the risque dancing of Marie Sallet, whose first ballet was Pygmalion in 1734. Handel bequeathed his organ to the theatre, and it took pride of place centre stage until it burned down with the rest of the building in 1808. When the theatre reopened the following year, it featured the magnificent portico you see today, complete with John Flaxman's frieze depicting tragedy and comedy. Audiences weren't altogether happy, however. They rioted against a hike in seat prices to cover the rebuilding, beating sticks to disrupt the performances. Easily the biggest star of that era was Joseph Grimaldi, the founding father of modern-day clowns. Grimaldi began his stage career aged 2 and was responsible for adding physical buffoonery and audience participation, as well as white-face makeup, to the traditional pantomime harlequinade. At the height of his fame in 1809, he was the toast of London, and the Theatre Royal paid him £3 a week. The theatre was renamed the Royal Opera House in 1892. The same year it gave a British premiere to Wagner's Ring Cycle, conducted by Gustav Mahler. Puccini's Tosca and Madame Butterfly followed shortly afterwards. After a £218 million makeover in the late 1990s, it's now a more welcoming and inclusive place. Tickets are cheaper. There's a free recital in the Crush Room on most Mondays, and you can join guided backstage tours daily. They start in the jaw-dropping velvet-clad auditorium, intact since 1858, with its 50-foot-tall stage and balconies dripping with gold. You'll usually visit the model room too, where sets are delicately constructed at doll's house size for every new production. But the highlight, perhaps, is peering into a Royal Ballet rehearsal studio, where you'll often see the principal dancers pirouetting away. To the right of the Opera House, along Floral Street, look for the Sky Bridge, which links the theatre with the Royal Ballet School across the road. No fewer than 1,500 11-year-old dancers apply to join the Royal Ballet School each year. Only 24 are successful. Behind you, meanwhile, stands a rather unloved building, the former Bow Street Police Station. Today it's in desperate need of a clean-up, but in 1749 this became the headquarters of Britain's first professional police force, the so-called Bow Street Runners. At first there were just 6 of them, and they were employed at state expense to apprehend criminals by one Henry Fielding, who was busy working as a magistrate here while also penning his groundbreaking comic novel, Tom Jones. Until that point, law enforcement had been mainly the work of so-called thief-takers, private citizens who went after highwaymen and robbers in return for a reward. But increasingly, the thief-takers were found to be committing the crimes themselves. Retrace your steps to Russell Street, where you need to turn left and then swiftly right into Catherine Street. Theatre Royal, Drury Lane. London's oldest working playhouse started life in 1663, when Charles II lifted the 11-year ban on theatre that had been imposed by Oliver Cromwell's Puritans. It claims to have been visited by every British monarch since. That entire 1660s building would fit on the stage today. It was roofless and featured Britain's first ever female actors and the first proscenium arch, or picture box stage, although the audience could pay extra to hop up and sit with the actors, and also to watch the actresses changing after the show. The theatre was later managed by the great actor David Garrick, and then the Irish playwright Richard Brinsley Sheridan, though Sheridan lost his fortune when it burnt down in 1809, despite boasting the world's first safety curtain. The building you're looking at now is the 4th on this site. Built in 1812, and the oak-lined lobby is well worth a look. It's manned by statues of William Shakespeare and Noel Coward, who scored a huge hit here in 1931 with his patriotic show Cavalcade, featuring a cast of 400. Backstage tours of the theatre run twice daily except for Sundays, and are sometimes performed in costume. Nell Gwynn, the actress, orange seller and mistress of Charles II, will lead you to the Royal Retiring Room, where King George V knighted an actor called Frank Benson with his own prop sword. Then you'll head down under the stage to see the giant hydraulic winches and trapdoors. After 350 years of putting on shows, Drury Lane is said to be full of ghosts. They include the celebrated Dan Leno, who perfected the role of the pantomime dame here in the 1890s. It's said that Leno's lavender scent wafts around backstage. There's also the brilliant but bad-tempered Charles Macklin, occasionally heard cursing in the corridor where he killed a fellow actor after a row about a wig. Since Victorian times, shows at the Lane have been famed for their spectacular special effects. Ivor Novello's productions in the 1930s included sinking ships, a train crash, and even an earthquake, while another recreated the Epsom Derby, featuring 12 real horses running on a treadmill. Miss Saigon ran for 10 years and 4,263 performances in the 1990s, and featured a real-life helicopter on the stage. Now it's time to continue along Catherine Street, but pause as you go for a glance to the right into Tavistock Street. A blue plaque there marks the house where in 1821 the writer Thomas de Quincey lived, and high above on the same building you might just make out a stone inscribed York Street 1636. The name of the thoroughfare has changed in the intervening years, but this remains the oldest dated street sign anywhere in London. At the foot of Catherine Street, turn right into Aldwych, which soon meets the Strand. En route, you'll pass two more playhouses, the Novello, named after the great Welsh composer who lived in apartments above the theatre, and the Duchess, which had the misfortune to host the shortest run in West End history, a show called The Intimate Review, which closed without completing its first performance. Reaching the Strand, cross carefully and turn left towards the tower of St Mary le Strand Church, which rises like a wedding cake among the traffic. Just before reaching it, turn right under the arches which front Somerset House. Somerset House. It may seem improbable as you stand here today, but for decades the great quadrangle in front of you served as a car park for tax inspectors. It looks more like a Renaissance palace, and indeed there was a palace here originally, built in 1547 for the first Duke of Somerset, older brother of Jane Seymour. Somerset was the Lord Protector of Henry VIII's heir, the boy king Edward VI. Over the following 150 years, several queens lived here, notably Anne of Denmark, the wife of King James I, who threw decadent royal masques or fancy dress balls in the early 1600s. One disapproving columnist of the day wrote of them, "The being in disguise takes away the usual checks and restraints of modesty." Later there came Queen Catherine of Braganza, whose husband Charles II was once caught clambering over the wall of Somerset House for an illicit meeting with her lady-in-waiting, the Duchess of Richmond. However, the grand Palladian quadrangle you see today was rebuilt in 1775 under the orders of King George III to house government departments and learned societies like the Royal Academy of Arts. That has led some to brand this the world's first ever purpose-built office block, and for decades it was the home of the Inland Revenue and Britain's register of births, deaths and marriages. Happily, since 1997, Somerset House has been thrown open to the public, and if you're here in the summer, 55 water jets will doubtless be dancing in the glamorous Fountain Court, making this a popular place for families to splash and play. Big-name pop concerts and film matinees are staged here in summer too, while from November to January the quadrangle becomes London's most eye-catching ice rink, with cupcakes, cocktails and a giant Christmas tree. In fact, if the courtyard looks vaguely familiar, you may recall it from the opening titles of the 2003 comedy movie Love Actually, which featured skaters on the rink. To the right, under the arches as you entered, is the entrance to one of London's most underrated art galleries, the Courtauld Institute. The admission fee is great value, because inside you'll find a sensational collection of paintings, especially strong on the Impressionists. It includes Vincent van Gogh sporting his bandaged ear, Edouard Manet's barmaid at the Folies Bergère, and a whole company of Edward Degas' ballet dancers. Next, stroll across the Fountain Court and enter by the steps on the opposite side. This southern wing of Somerset House is home to the Embankment Galleries, which today house exhibitions devoted to 20th century fashion, photography and design. The architecture is worth investigating too. See if you can track down the Nelson Stair, an elegant 18th century staircase designed to echo the prow of a ship. On the basement level, you'll also find a wide archway out onto the Thames Embankment. In the days when Somerset House was the headquarters of the Navy Board, captains would steer their ships through here directly from the river and moor in the courtyard. This basement floor also has a doorway leading to the creepy Dead House, a mysterious sunken vault in the bowels of the original Tudor palace, which has gravestones studding its walls. It's thought these belonged to the Roman Catholic courtiers of Queen Henrietta Maria, the French wife of Charles I. Unsurprisingly, the Dead House now makes a popular film location for Jack the Ripper shoots. There's more information on Somerset House on page 121 of your guide. Your day is done, and it's going to end in theatrical style. Head back upstairs onto the Somerset House terrace with its terrific Thames view, order a drink from the bar, and raise a glass to your walk through theatre.